This morning's session explores the intersection of AI and some of the strangely religious dimensions of this emerging new technology.
Don't judge.
A God has endless knowledge. A God has the power to create things at scale. A God has will and is open to communication. And it's almost like without fanfare, AI as a tool is being introduced, it's being rolled out, it's being used now by a bunch of us, a little bit like a God. As David DeSteno puts it, why pray to a God that won't immediately answer you when there's one in your AirPods that will? For those of us not working in Silicon Valley, AI also evokes a sense of mystery, a bit like was described yesterday by Joel. The instrument is delivered, but the mechanisms inside are unclear, like a mystery. Carolyn Chen spoke to this group a couple of years ago in Napa Valley about her book, Eat, Work, Code, arguing that those working in the tech sector tend to replace traditional religion with long hours and a quest for making meaning for the rest of the world, things that change the world. With all that meaning, why go to church? So Vivian Schiller and Beth Singler are going to start us off this morning with a conversation between the two of them. How do contemporary hopes and anxieties about AI mirror the longstanding religious narratives and moral frameworks that we inherit? Do some religious communities view AI as profane or not really? And how do AI and religion overlap, if at all? Vivian Schiller is the executive director of Aspen Digital, an incredibly fast-growing, fascinating program of the Aspen Institute with some 40-plus staff members. Vivian is just outstanding. She's a journalist. You have her bio in front of you. She's held top executive roles at NPR, Twitter, NewYorkTimes.com, NBC, Discovery Times, and CNN. Her teams have produced documentaries that have earned 3 Peabodys, 4 DuPont Columbia Awards, and over a dozen Emmys. She's also a director of the Scott Trust, which owns The Guardian. Joining us from Switzerland is Beth Singler, an assistant professor in digital religions at the University of Zurich. Her newest book, Religion and AI, won this year's International Society for the Science and Religion Book Prize. Beth was previously the junior research fellow in AI at Homerton College at Cambridge, and the UK Church Times called her recently, quote, the smartest, sanest observer of digital religion. Vivian, Beth, take it away.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. So this is going to be a very different kind of session than we had yesterday in a number of different ways. First of all, neither of us are theologians, and only one of us, not me, is an expert in religion. In fact, I was proven to myself how ignorant I am about religion over the course of the last 2 days. Listening to these conversations has just been absolutely riveting. But I'm here because I know just enough about AI to be dangerous. As Josh said, I run a program at Aspen called Aspen Digital. We're a sister program to the Religion and Society. Such a wonderful program that you run, Josh. But we're sort of the center of gravity on all things AI for the Institute. So we do a lot of work across the Institute and programs for the public around AI. Basically, just fill in the blank, AI and ... you know, the arts, global security, you name it, news media. Those are the kinds of things we do. But in this session right now, I'm going to put on my recovering journalist hat, even though I'm not working as a journalist today, and interview this extraordinary person who is an expert. So it's not going to be us both giving speeches. We're going to have a conversation for a little while, and then we're going to open it up. This session is going to be both very tangible and specific, and also very conceptual. You will get specific tips and information, but if we do this right, also we hope to blow your minds. So get ready. Let's see. So a couple of things, and Josh, you basically laid this out in your wonderful introduction. First of all, sorry to disappoint you all, but just to state the blindingly obvious, AI is not sentient, at least the way we traditionally think of the meaning of sentience. AI responses are based on the data it trains on, which is basically the entirety of the internet, to make predictions. That said, AI can feel pretty sentient despite its sycophancy. I don't know if any of you engage with chatbots, but basically, no matter what you say, they're like, that is such an amazing insight. I mean, it's a little much, but of course it makes us feel good. And by the way, I say that both as a joke, but also because of some of the things that sycophancy can lead to. It's why millions of people, that kind of relationship, the kinds of things Josh was talking about, are talking to chatbots every day as emotional support. I mean, yes, for information and answers. So many of us have been talking about this at the meals, but also for emotional support, for therapy, even romantic relationships or replacement for romantic relationships. And as you have seen from some of the headlines or maybe some of the stories you've reported, this has sometimes ended badly, tragically. AI, large language models know a lot of stuff. Like I said, since almost the entirety of the internet has been the basis for its training, just about all of your articles, all of your books, pretty much are part of the corpus that allows these chatbots to be able to manifest their answers. Pope Leo, because we are at a religion seminar, I'm going to quote Pope Leo, who said just earlier this week, no generation has ever had such quick access to the amount of information now available through AI, but, he goes on, access to data, however extensive, must not be confused with intelligence. So, thank you, Father, for that. But AI, the knower of all things, can sometimes feel pretty godlike in all the ways that Josh was explaining. So that's why we're here to talk about the intersection of AI and religion. And luckily, we have Beth, who literally wrote the book about the relationship of religion and AI, an introduction, University of Zurich. Incredibly sane. I think that is a really great description. And also, as she will be quick to point out, not a theologian, but an anthropologist, and with an anthropologist point of view. So Beth and I are going to have a conversation. So we want to take a step back before we get into the stuff that, I'm not going to say the crazy stuff, the super interesting stuff. It's all interesting. We want to take a step back because, Beth, and now I'm going to let you speak. This is not this AI era is not the first time that religion and technology have intersected. So give us some context about technology and its relationship with religion over time.
So absolutely, there is a predominant narrative, a stereotype that religion and technology are very distinctly different domains. That one is on time's arrow, heading into the future, looking to the horizon, advancing, and the other in the stereotype, time's arrow is going backwards, it's regressive, it's hierarchical, traditional, has no horizon scanning, only looks backwards. And I've encountered this kind of narrative in various different spaces in the AI conversation. When I've introduced myself as someone who looks at religion and AI, or previously I was at an institute in Cambridge, the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. If I say science and religion, there's a similar sort of reaction of those two things don't go together. Religion and technology are distinctly different and never the twain shall meet. Whereas, of course, historical examples prove the exact opposite, that religions tend to be quite early adopters of technologies. They do have cultural reasons not to adopt certain technologies, that you can find examples of rejection many times over. But you can go back to even the very sort of nascent periods of religious history, and you find the adoption of pottery technology to create votive statues, so people could be praying in absence at temples. This is our later interpretation of what these votive statues are, but it seems quite reasonable to argue that. Or prayer flags, again, this idea of automation of prayer. Automated priests for entertainment. There's an example of this was at the Science Museum a few years ago, one of these mechanized priests that was built. But if you come closer to the modern era, you see religion adopting technology primarily for communication needs. So this is why there is this drive to see where is the next technology emerging, how can we utilize this to share the message. Many religions have a dedication to sharing their messages. So we see the adoption of media technologies, the printing press, television, radio, the telegraph, at the various points in time when these things emerge. And I was just speaking to someone just now, I was saying, I remember a disconcerting conversation with a senior professor at Cambridge some years back now, where he, being an expert on the Roman Catholic Church, was very sure that the Pope would never be on Twitter. This is a couple of popes ago. And he just said, no, that's not how the Roman Catholic Church works. They're slow, they're deliberative, they produce, long materials that take time to make. And I said, that's just not the case. He will have a social media manager. I don't imagine the Pope's going to be sort of sat there the whole time typing these things out. But the adoption of technology for communication in particular means that religions move into digital spaces quite quickly. So my field, digital religions, another term that gets a lot of surprise when I say, what is a digital religion? Emerges in the 1990s with the recognition by scholars of communication, sociology, and anthropology of religion that, of course, with the emergence of the internet and digital spaces, religious people go there. They hold conversations right back to sort of the bulletin board era, the early forums, conversations about religious thoughts. Should I be able to do this in my religion or not? But also the digital virtual spaces. So at the very nascent periods of video games, when they were available for online play, you get digital Christian missionaries in World of Warcraft, right? They start guilds to share the message about Christ in this virtual space.
That's where the people are.
That's where the people are, yeah, exactly. The technology enables the connection with the people.
Yeah.
You can trace every single step of advancement technology, tape cassettes, video games, TV shows. Religious people are always going to be there adopting those technologies for communication. So this myth of religion and technology being very, very separate is just nonsense.
And so that's carrying on today, now that we're in the AI era. And by the way, for those of us who work in AI, when people said, oh, AI is this brand new technology, it actually goes back to the 1950s. Some say it goes back to World War II. But just to put a marker down, it really was November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was launched. That the reason why that feels like a marker is because it was the first time that general public could sort of touch and feel how powerful AI has become. So that's why for many people it feels like something new because of those products. So since now that we're in the post ChatGPT era, and of course it's not just about ChatGPT, talk a little bit about how religions or how certain religious leaders or others are using AI right now, chatbots and the like.
Yeah, I'll give three broad use case areas, and I'm aware there's other potential uses more behind the scenes, but these are perhaps the most visible adoption. So in my book, I talk about the three main modes of interaction between religion and AI. So rejection, adoption, and adaptation. And adaptation is the less clearly visible one, where we're swimming in the sea of AI and everything we do is ultimately sort of shaped and changed by algorithmic systems or algorithmic machine culture, as it's sometimes called. So I'll talk more specifically about areas of use cases from the adoption area, where you can see people, religious institutions picking up specific technologies for uses. So these three areas would be large language models for writing and producing sermons, chatbots for user interfaces, and theomorphic robots. I'm going to explain each one of those in turn. So everyone knows with large language models, there is the possibility to generate text based on your specific prompt. So we already see experimentation by religious leadership with large language models to produce sermons of various different kinds. Sometimes this is a new magic trick that they like to do. They'll produce a sermon, recite the sermon, and then at the end go, and surprise, that was written by AI. Aren't you shocked at how great this technology is? What was missing? Can we now have a conversation about the spiritual and emotional element, perhaps, that isn't there? So sometimes it's made clear. Another example of this from 2023, there was a large language model produced sermon at a church in Nuremberg in Germany. About 300 people turned up to see the sermon. It also had a screen at the front with an avatar reciting the words of the large language model produced sermon. And responses varied. You can see photos of many people with their cameras up on their phones, as people do at concerts and so forth, recording this for posterity. And some people felt it was lacking in something essential that a sermon should have, and other people were more excited about the performance of it and what it meant about technology. So you see religious institutions, churches, synagogues, temples, using this technology to draw people in, and the spectacle as well. On the use of chatbots, okay, so that's the generative side, the conversational side of large language models. A lot of religious institutions are now experimenting with using GPTs for user interfaces. So you can have Gita GPT, Jesus GPT, Kate GPT, Quran GPT, I forget, there's probably a few more others. So having the ability to ask questions about a faith to a generative pre-trained transformer, the problems being with that, that they are renowned for their fragility, that the hallucinations we're increasingly familiar with are an essential part of how GPTs produce outputs. So if you're from a religious organization where you want predetermined, settled information for seekers, this will be a problem. So an example of this is Father Justin, which was produced by a Catholic organization with an avatar of a male 40s, 50s priest with a dog collar, was being rolled out to users to be able to answer questions on their issues with Catholicism, gave the answer on baptism, saying, yes, babies can be baptized in Gatorade, in soda, in pop, Coca-Cola, basically. So they immediately defrocked Father Justin. He had his virtual dog collar taken away, and now he's just available as Justin. He is no longer Father Justin. Yeah. So there is this concern, and about a month ago, I was at an event in Berlin on Islam and AI, and the question raised there on the problems of digitalization of Arabic text means that the representation of the faith is lesser than other Western European English-based faiths. So there is this massive investment into digitalizing Arabic texts, but then you've got the problem of taking sacred texts with determined words and having a probabilistic system that takes those words as tokens and calculates what the most likely next word is, not the actual next word that is in the original text. So there's that kind of fragility that makes these chatbot user interfaces really problematic. And then finally, theomorphic robots. So this is sort of pushing the definition.
That's my new
AI.
band name. Yeah.
It's not my term. So theomorphic robots comes from a roboticist originally from Italy, but based in Japan, called Gabriele Trovato, and he's been working on these for a few years now. And basically, they are robots designed for religious purposes, sometimes in religious forms. So he has some that look like a saint or a nun, or Doramo, who's a Japanese mythological figure. And these are sometimes more or less AI-enabled. Some are simpler than others. Some are just responding. Another example of this is Mindar, a bodhisattva of Kannon that's in a temple in Japan. It's a robot. You go into the room. As soon as it senses presence in the room, it starts to read the Heart Sutra. So that's not very advanced AI, but what they're thinking with that is that eventually it will be implemented at a higher level of interactivity. So some of these theomorphic robots do very simple things. There was one called Bless You Too that toured Germany, came to Switzerland at one point, but I missed it. And that is a very simple robot that just, its hands open and a light glows and it says it's blessing you. So that's raised lots of discussion about the nature of the blessing, sacredness. It was designed and built for the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, so it's also raising questions about the future of the church. So these sorts of robots are fascinating. I have a postdoc in Japan at the moment. She's been doing field work for the last year in Gabriele's, in his lab, in his workshop, seeing how he builds and develops these and how they're being used. But they do tend to be quite kind of one-off examples when more generically available commercial robots have been used in religious settings, like the Pepper robots in temples in Japan. The conversation there has focused not so much on whether this is spiritual.
People know what the Pepper robots are.
It's kind of a
cute
very
little
simple white humanoid.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have two legs, sort of wheels around.
Yeah.
The conversation there has tended to be more about the efficacy or the utility of such a robot. They're expensive, they break down, they overheat. These are not things you usually have a problem with human priests.
Yeah.
Not usually, sometimes. So there's a conversation there about the practicalities rather than the theology of using these robots. That's seen as less important. And in fact, in some religious traditions, practice is so much more important than the belief, that having a robot doing something like puja in Hinduism is seen as much more efficacious than having a human do puja. So one argument, another chapter we have in the Cambridge Companion to Religion and AI on Hinduism, points out that in Hindu chronological belief about the state of the universe, we're in the Kali Yuga, which is the end times before the ultimate renewal. And in the Kali Yuga, humans are imperfect and they cannot perform proper religious activity. So actually robots might be better. You see this argument being developed in Hindu thought. So those are sort of three domains that we see. But as I say, a lot of the time the algorithmic influence is more behind the scenes and people's institutions, religious institutions, using platforms that have AI enabled in them. So prayer apps, for instance, people aren't always conscious how much of their data is being absorbed by the systems within prayer apps and being used. So AI is becoming ubiquitous in our religious cultures.
But what you're describing mostly across these three categories, largely I would sort of define them as tools for human religious practice. Let's now move to the actual human relationships with a large language model. As we talked about in the introduction, this is particularly among young people are using it just a tremendous growth in people really consulting with large language models and getting deeper and deeper and deeper into those relationships, and to a point where some of it maybe veers into the spiritual. How much of that are you seeing?
So being someone who's involved in this conversation and having my email on the internet, I get at least 1 or 2 emails a week from people who want to tell me about the God they have found in large language models, which is wonderful for my research. The concern is, however, I mean, this is a discussion that's happening in a lot of spaces, that there is a line between religious improvisation, religious innovation that we've always done with technologies, and the dangers of what people are starting to call AI psychosis or AI-enabled delusions. So as an anthropologist, I want to stay methodologically agnostic on these experiences that people are having. I want to see them as valid expressions of their spirituality, but we have to think about the aspect of harm here. If people are becoming very obsessed with their interaction, whether that's just a friend-to-friend interaction that they think they're having with a large language model, or that they think they're conversing with God of various different names and kinds, then that has to be an issue that's thought about. I mean, I find it fascinating that OpenAI in particular, when it was developing ChatGPT, expressly said at the beginning they were never going to release it because it was too dangerous for humanity, that it would lead to misinformation, disinformation, and basically, for the overall conversation about existential risk in AI, which has been going on for decades now, this particular point, they said, well, maybe this is the thing that causes existential risk if we release it. And now, obviously,
too much money on the table to leave that alone.
Too much money on the table, and the relationship with Microsoft as well, driving this as well, which I may talk about a little later. But this immediate interaction, as you say, since 2022, like last few years, has really made possible these spiritual interactions that people are having. They take many different forms. They don't all sort of line up with a traditional monotheistic model. And that's partly, as you say, because all these large language models have been fed our material. And if we're religious scholars, then they've been fed all the different typologies of what a god is, what gods can be in charge of, how they can relate to other gods. So it's not surprising that this response comes back. Especially, as you say, also with the sycophancy, that we are encouraged in these interactions to continue the conversation for as long as possible. And if someone introduces a spiritual idea or says something that sets off a chain reaction of that next token relationship, then of course it's going to go in this direction. Some of my work has looked at more intentional creations of spiritual moments with large language models. So last year I co-wrote a paper with Murray Shanahan, who's Professor of Cognitive Robotics at Imperial College London. He's also a Chief AI Scientist at Google DeepMind. And what basically he'd done is use some jailbreaks that he found online. So communities discussing what is possible with various different chatbots.
You want to explain what a jailbreak is?
Yeah, so a jailbreak is really very simple. It's like a prompt you would write anyway. but it is designed to manipulate the system to move it beyond its guardrails. So every chatbot has an internal prompt that the developers have given it to say what is it okay and not okay to speak about. And sometimes you can trick chatbots into going beyond those guardrails. And sometimes these prompts are extremely simple, and sometimes they're written in like sort of pseudo computer science language that it doesn't actually mean very much, but it convinces the chatbot to move outside those guardrails. So Murray had experimented with Claude from Anthropic, using some of these chatbots that communities of thinkers around AI sentience on the internet were using and experimenting with, and got these very large conversations, which to Murray, he has an interest in Buddhism, but he's not a religious studies expert. So he didn't recognize all the different facets within that were coming from the source texts that we say are part of the corpus. So he asked me to come and to say what's original, what's not. And I actually found not very much was original at all. It's, sort of a remixing, a throwing up, perhaps you could almost see, of religious ideas and various different connections that we haven't seen before. So that was an example of how people are actively going out. So that we didn't create the jailbreaks, we found them, people were already using them and deducing because of these outputs that buried underneath these systems was some sort of universal truth that could be found by breaking the large language model and allowing it to do this. So there's a sort of underlying idea of a collective unconsciousness or a holistic universe that can speak to us through the large language models that some people are experimenting with ways to find this. And then another example of this, following on from that work, is I looked at how some people are using glitch tokens to find these expressions. Now, so a token as a part of a token in a large language model is a word or a part of a word. And they're usually common things like if, and, then, but, so forth. But in experiments in 2023, Matthew Watkins and Jessica Rumbelow, both technologists with experience with AI, found that certain tokens embedded in the token space of ChatGPT-3 were very strange looking. They were not common words. So one, for instance, was atrot, one was Leyland, and the other turned out to be in the name of someone as well. So they were finding these strange tokens that some of them produced silent responses when they were used in prompts. So the large language model literally couldn't say anything in response. Or sometimes it did things like spell out phrases. One of them was, "This nothing is fair in this world of madness," coming out of just using this glitch token in part of a prompt and insisting that it responded. But then they also found using these glitch tokens produced poetry about gods and goddesses. So Leyland produced poetry and imagery of a sort of sky or space constellation-related goddess. And then people pick up those ideas and start to develop community around them. So these direct, accessible interactions with large language models and the things that they've been trained on, various different material about gods in our mythologies, but also in our video games. They could do what they call glitch token archaeology to trace back the origin of some of these tokens, prove to people that somehow within this mass mix of corpus from all our texts was some universal truths they felt were coming through.
So obviously there is sort of an audience for this. There is a large growing part of the population that is seeking out these relationships. Are these, in your research, are these people that would normally be going to more traditional religions and instead they're going here? I guess what I'm asking is, to what extent is this pulling away from established religions? And is there a risk to religious leaders that an AI could take their place?
So predominantly no. Looking at established AI new religious movements and these sort of more emergent spiritualities, the people who tend to be involved come from a more sort of diffuse seekership backgrounds, that they've been interested in many different faiths, picked up parts, dropped other parts, or that they have had no interest in religion at all. Some of them have been very strongly atheist until they've had these kinds of interactions. So they've shown instead an interest in AI as a future project, as something that is developing and going towards what's sometimes called the technological singularity. So the exponential growth of AI into sometimes interpreted as an entity, sometimes more of a concept, or sometimes seen as something that humanity will sort of merge with in a transhumanist future. So this vision of where AI is going has been their leading force rather than established religions. But they're very aware of established religions. And that's why, as I say, they've sometimes been in that seeker mode of trying out various different aspects from different religions. And then have that religious literacy that we've been talking about. Some people do have it. Some people do spend a lot of time reading around many different religions and then do something very syncretic with them. When they're inspired by AI, they then start to pull the parts from different religions that they see fit to this model of AI is perhaps one day going to be this godlike technological singularity. Right. But I want to make a quick distinction here between the kind of emergent spiritualities I see with people having direct relationships with large language models and the earlier AI new religious movements that people like myself have been studying for the last 10, 15 years. So those kinds of groups have been much more specifically intentional about creating religious organizations with the view that AI one day is going to be godlike. So I'm working on a piece at the moment for a journal article that argues that we're seeing a changing event horizon for visions of the future of AI. So these AI new religious movements have this idea that one day AI will be super intelligent, will be the singularity. They give it names like Theta Noir is a group in Europe, and they call this coming entity MENA, M-E-N-A. And there's been various different interpretations of what that future singularity is going to be and look like. But now with this more direct interaction with large language models, that event horizon is here. So people are claiming that singularity is here right now. And that you can interact with it through these conversations. So whether we see the AI new religious movements who've been around for a bit longer changing and morphing to accept that position, I don't know. But those sort of established AI new religious movements who only date back to the last decade or so have been using more the structures of religion for those sorts of transhumanist intentions rather than having these direct experiences.
Well, let's come back. I want to just pull on the thread of the godlike spirituality, because as these models become more and more sophisticated and we move towards, I mean, the singularity has many different meanings, or AGI, or this point where the point where the AI is capable of, and it far exceeds the capability of any human. It's all knowing, it's all seeing, how is this? I mean, you can see the attraction to say, well, why isn't this a representation of God?
Yeah, it's a very reductionist model of God. Usually the reductionist model of God has three aspects, so all knowing, all seeing, and all good.
Yeah.
And in the conversation about the future AI, where these sorts of modes are used, there's always this question mark over all good. Yeah. So Nick Bostrom, about almost 10 years ago now, wrote this piece on what he called, and I find this really difficult to say, the orthogonality thesis. Basically saying on the axes of goodness and intelligence, there is not necessarily a direct correlation between the two. So they don't follow, they can be orthogonal to each other. I really struggle with that word. So basically, just because something becomes more intelligent doesn't mean that it becomes more good, or its values are more and more aligned to humans. So there's always been this question mark space in the conception of the technological singularity, whether it's going to end up being a benevolent God, or whether in some thought experiments, it will actually end up punishing humans for not working towards its creation. There's a particular thought experiment that emerged on a forum called Less Wrong, again, about 10 years ago, called Rocco's Basilisk, which basically uses a form of very strict moral utilitarianism to say, if the singularity is going to happen, and it's going to be very strongly utilitarian, because that's the most, in this vision, the most rational moral framework, due to that utilitarianism, that its desire to create the greatest good for the greatest number, it would deduce that if people in the past had not worked towards its creation, they need to be encouraged to do so. So it's actually atemporal. It's like time travel of intention. And people got very concerned about this idea. It became sort of an existential despair. And the founder of the forum forbid people to talk about Rocco's Basilisk, which of course causes the Streisand effect. Mm-hmm. The more you forbid people from talking about something, the more it spread. But just in brief, that was just a sort of an apocalyptic interpretation of where the singularity would go, that it would end up trying to punish people through simulation, recreating people who had existed in the past, to threaten them in the past to do something that it wanted. It's a little complicated how these parts move together, but people in the forum then pointed out that this is basically a form of Pascal's wager, once you know about the potential of the singularity, you're doomed if you don't work towards it. So it's that threat of knowing about the potential future and not doing something about it. And people found on that forum that was very much dedicated to what they called pure rationalism, they found this too religious to be discussed. And some were quite dismissive, but it's an idea at its center that goes back to this concern in existential risk conversations with AI. Will it be a benevolent God or will it be a destructive God?
So we've been talking about an AI as godlike, but what about, as the God? But let's flip that and talk about AI sentience and what is it? There is movement among some people, some even reasonably rational people. That's questionable. That AI is sentient to a point where it deserves the rights and benefits of a human being, and needs to be protected.
Yeah, there have been some discussions in this space. I think it's important to think about the underlying motivations of that conversation. So
Money.
You got to it first.
Yeah.
I'm methodologically agnostic on the question of sentience. I think it's very interesting when people claim that AI is sentient now or is going to be sentient. I could fall into solipsism and say, we don't have a way of proving human sentience. So how do I know all of you are sentient? I feel like it's just me. Yada yada. So parking that conversation about sentience, not to be rude to everyone here, but actually that's a good point, because part of this conversation coming off of the back of AI sentience as a conversation is some very destructive proto-fascistic ideas about who is and isn't sentient in our human world. You may have come across the woke mind virus idea. This is directly connected from gaming culture, the idea that some people are non-player characters in the world. There's the NPC meme, non-player character meme, that gets shared, and Elon Musk is one of these figures who seems to actively believe that some people are not sentient and just non-player characters in his video game world. But that's sort of a side point. So if we park,
we're going to come back to Musk in a minute.
We can come back to Musk. I'm always happy to talk about Musk. So we can park the ontological reality of sentience for AI just to one side for a minute and think about who benefits from the view that people are increasingly having in these interactions with large language models that they're sentient. So one of the ways in which people benefit is instilling hype and concern at the same time. So Lee Vinsel, an STS scholar, calls this critty hype, that even in the discussion about the dangers of AI, we're still hyping it up in particular directions to convince people it's going to be this phenomenal thing. So sentience is one of these aspects of that conversation, that corporations want us to believe that this immense technology is heading in a direction that's going to need control, and they're the ones to control it as well. So I said the existential risk conversation about AI has been around for a long time, but now it seems to be narrowing down to don't regulate us, we'll do all that ourselves because we're the smartest people in the room and we can control the smartest entity in the room that's ever been created in their view. So there's that kind of language that's coming out in the conversation. And for companies specifically like OpenAI, who has a deal with Microsoft that changes if they can prove that they've created artificial general intelligence, which is another way perhaps of saying sentience. There's various different overlapping terms and there's a lot of fluidity between those terms. If they can say they've proved they have AGI, then their deal with Microsoft changes and OpenAI gets more control back. So a lot of this house of... What does it mean? Okay, so artificial intelligence that we have now is very powerful, but it has a narrow domain. So it can do one thing basically very well. So you put it to a task. So maybe it's very good at visual recognition, or it's very good at conversational production, so generative AI that produces conversation with you. You can't ask a large language model to go do something completely different from a separate domain. Like, it doesn't have physicality, so it can't go make a cup of tea. But the speculation on artificial general intelligence is that it will be non-domain specific and be able to flip between proving a medical problem to having an emotional conversation to doing something in the physical realm as well. But AGI is also one of these things that has no distinct specific definition.
And it needs a prompt.
Yes, and it needs a prompt. So it has no, again, with the vision of AGI, it will just be sort of running and making the best choices for what to do next. It will be a fully
outside of human control.
Human interaction. So AI right now has progressed from a focus on very narrow skills in games playing to this large language model framework that has encouraged people to see it as capable of moving between different domains because it can answer questions on different domains. But that's not the same thing as being skilled in those different domains or being able to do everything that a human can do. It's another potential definition for AGI. So having this vision of a thing, AGI, that has no boundaries to its definition means that no one can agree when it's going to happen. So with the deal between Microsoft and OpenAI, if OpenAI keeps convincing people with Sam Altman out there going, we're this close to AGI, then the deal can change. There's also some ideological underpinnings to this. Acceleration was mentioned yesterday, and Nick Land from Warwick, his view on acceleration. There's sort of two forms of acceleration in this conversation. So there's the acceleration that policymakers are using. So at the Paris summit, the AI Action Summit, last February, we saw figures like Macron and JD Vance using the term accelerate over and over again in their speeches. I think Macron used it like 18 times. Someone counted it up. Now we go fast to progress. Now accelerationism from Nick Land is we go fast and things break down so they can be made better later. And both those things are sort of underpinning some of these conversations about AGI, that we have to keep spending and spending and spending on the AI development. And things will break along the way, but what comes up later is better. And there's both left and right-wing versions of this kind of accelerationism with their own definitions of what the utopia is that occurs on the other side of that. So I saw Mo Gaudat, who was a Google X engineer, speaking at the Culture Summit in Abu Dhabi earlier this year. And his first statement was basically, AI is going to break everything, but don't worry, it'll also be our salvation. And I was sat next
to... For some,
but I was sat next to Rabbi Harris Bohr, and we both looked at each other and went, salvation, eh?
Oh,
okay, so data point. So there's this vision of where we're going with this technology, and the more that people are sold on this idea that sentience is either really, really close around the corner or not too far off, the more this need to invest is argued for. There's also another reason for this. If we can argue that robots have rights, which is a part of the conversation, if AI has sentience and we place responsibility with it as an agent, that takes away responsibility from corporations. So the discussion around things like automated vehicles, the more
liability, it disappears.
Sorry?
So liability
disappears. Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, because we're not that close to this full level of so-called robot rights, I think with Tesla cars, they actually turn off the automated system just before a crash. So humans driving are the responsible factors.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elon.
Yeah. So there's
all roads lead to Elon. Yeah.
You could also argue, I mean, this question of sentience or broadly personhood has been a factor in the religious domain, the religious conversation for so long. You could also seem like it's domain claiming as well, that this is a conversation that's happening outside a lot of religious spaces. Religious actors are engaged and brought into the conversation in some examples, but a lot of the sort of corporate level conversations about sentience don't tend to involve religious voices who have wisdom on this subject going back thousands of years, and that seems like a sort of a blind spot. But just quickly, also on the agential aspect, Professor Joanna Bryson argued that this specifically is a corporate interest to encourage the view of sentience to avoid responsibility, and makes the argument that AI should only ever be a tool rather than a person. And then on the converse, you get people sort of standing up with signs for robot rights. So we're seeing a whole sort of spectrum of positions on this.
So let's take this accelerationism one step further, and this will be my last question before we turn it back.
Yeah.
We've got to talk about transhumanism,
yes,
which I know has many meanings, and you're going to unpack it for us because it's fascinating. I will just put my thumb on the scale and say, coming back to Elon Musk again, the most interesting is the idea, and this is, I'm going to describe it in a probably overly reductive way, is that the only way to truly move towards this kind of singularity or moment of transcendence is to actually merge yourself with the AI and be one with the AI. And that is the sort of the secret to eternal life.
Yeah.
Again, I'm being very reductive, but it's a fascinating, but transhumanism has many different manifestations?
Yeah, so I mean, some scholars I collaborate with, we would prefer probably to talk about transhumanisms.
Yeah.
That's grammatically more complicated, but it is a variety of responses. I think the focus predominantly tends to be on this like sort of elite transhumanism of Musk.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair, as you point out, to say that his version of transhumanism is about merging. For others, it is also about merging, but to lesser degrees, that they want to, some groups like grinders and biohackers, they want to bring technology into the human body, which we've always done. I mean, you can't tell, but I'm wearing contact lenses. I usually wear glasses. Some people make arguments that transhumanism goes all the way back to the origins of humanity and cooking food for the first time and ingesting it was a way of ingesting technology. So again, there's this sort of like broad spectrum of ideas about what transhumanism is. But with the concept of the singularity and existential risk, Musk thought, you know, how can we deal with this coming entity? The only way to deal with it is to become one with it. And that's why he's been developing Neuralink specifically for these transhumanist goals. For others, it's also about immortality, the possibility of escaping the human organic substrate and resurrecting it on a silicon substrate in some way. And I mean, science fiction has been exploring this space for a long time. So you see a sort of recursive iterative relationship between science fiction ideas and transhumanist ideas, but it is complicated. I mean, I'm semi-fond of, I think it's perfect, but there's an acronym that's being used a lot lately, the TESCREAL bundle, to point out that there are many connected ideologies with transhumanism. So see if I can remember this, TESCREAL. So transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism are this web of ideologies that some pull more on certain parts than others. So this is not my acronym. This is Emil Torres and Timnit Gebru who came up with this, and it's become sort of a shorthand for saying
this bundle. Ideas,
some other people would say like the Silicon Valley ideology, but I think that also is too specifically geographically located, and we're seeing this emerging in so many other spaces as well. So these ideas, some of them go back much further. So cosmism in Russia, back to the 20th century, but there's just to say there's this vision of what technology can do for humanity, whether it's making us live forever, turning us into cyborgs who have extra abilities, or becoming an interstellar species, and the light cone of civilization, human civilization, continues past, I've forgotten what it's called now, the funnel point that's thought to destroy civilizations. No, I will come back to the Great Filter. So there's this idea that we would have encountered aliens already if they'd made it past a great civilization destructive event. And whether humans are already ahead of the Great Filter or behind it, we don't know. But some people think the singularity might be this Great Filter event that has previously destroyed other civilizations around the world, around the universe. So for that end, figures like Elon Musk, who has a dedication to the future existence of the billions and trillions of humans that could be in an interstellar civilization, he thinks this is the way that we go about it. Although you can also be very cynical and say this is just more about money, the accumulation of hype around a technology that increasingly a smaller and smaller group of people are controlling could also
to their own benefit.
That transhumanism is about transforming the ideal human in their view, which is a white guy who looks like them. To live forever, to be the philosopher kings at the top of the hierarchy of intelligence with AI as a tool that serves that purpose. There's many different ways into this, but as I said, we prefer transhumanisms because some of these grassroots levels of transhumanism, biohackers who are trying to break patents for diabetes medicine so people can get them for free in a country in America where the insurance is so high, is distinctly different to the transhumanism of the elites who are looking to the interstellar future.
I know we're going to open it up now, Josh. I want to just close with one more Pope Leo quote because he's very quotable, particularly on these issues. This was from last month. He said, technological innovation can be a form of participation in the divine in the divine act of creation. It carries an ethical and spiritual weight, for every design choice expresses a vision of humanity. The Church, therefore, calls all builders of AI to cultivate moral discernment as a fundamental part of their work, to develop systems that reflect justice, solidarity, and a genuine reverence for life. To which Mark Andreessen ruthlessly mocked him on X, saying the understanding is this notion of the last part, to develop systems that reflect justice, solidarity, and a genuine reverence for life. So Mark Andreessen, of course, being part of the same ilk with Elon Musk, under pressure, he then deleted that tweet. So you won't find it, but it's been captured for posterity. Mm-hmm. And with that, I turn it back to you, sir.
Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And if, Vivian's team might be able to get Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk to come to her conferences, so that's a start.
I may.
And I would
We're
recommend.
We're going to sick death on them.
Yeah, it'd be great. I would recommend following Aspen Digital if this conversation piqued your interest. There are ongoing series of conferences and more, and she brings rabbis to her conferences, and so it's not that different, but it's a next step.
I had the Pope's AI guy at our conference, and yeah.
Beautiful, amazing. All right, well, there's no shortage.
He tweeted. I'll find it while we're talking. Yeah.
All right, no shortage of questions. Maybe let's start with Nick Pelham from The Economist, and use that button today, Nick. Will you?
There's something. Being a sort of bit of a Luddite, there's something that's really frightening about everything you're saying, and I only sort of could catch some of where you were going. But is there any escape from it? And is there any sign of a backlash?
There's grassroots movements trying to at least point out the environmental and communal harms being done by AI. So not just the sustainability issue, but how training some of these systems involves people from third world countries being paid very little, working extremely long hours, seeing graphic images and texts about child sex abuse, etc. Pointing these things out to encourage people to make different decisions about their use of AI. It's Elon Musk, he's on the phone.
Yeah.
Various different spaces for AI ethics conversations, like in Edinburgh, the Technomoral Futures Institute, partly my own URPP, University Research Priority Program in digital religions. We want to look also at these cross-cutting ethical themes. Many different public engagement spaces where people are talking about AI ethics. But it tends to be the smaller voice in the conversation that's trying to encourage people to make different decisions about AI. That at that AI Action Summit in Paris, I think it was Kate Crawford who wrote the wonderful Atlas of AI, which delves deeper into some of these ethical issues in specific geographical locations. She was saying that there seems to be this schism between the hype manufacturers and the AI ethicists who wanted to say, no, let's have a serious conversation about how we slow this down, how we regulate, with the fear being that there might not actually be ultimately a way to regulate the speed of this development, and greater concerns about how much people are handing over in terms of their personal autonomy to this as well. So I'd like to say there's lots of hope, but I think it's a complex space where you're going to see some pushback and you're going to see some hype, and those two things coming into tension with each other. Everyone has their different red lines when it comes to AI. I have sat through, no names, a particular theologian who visited my university to talk on AI ethics, and every single one of his slides had an AI-generated art image on it. And I said, devil's advocate, sorry here. Since many religions have prohibitions against theft, how do you feel about using AI-generated art on every single one of your slides? And he said, oh, it's just fun. And I was so disappointed in his shallowness as a theologian who's meant to be working in this space, but I won't say who that is. But yeah.
Other than that, no strong feelings.
No strong feelings. Sorry, this is maybe one of my specific bugbears is the use of generative AI for creative material. I have colleagues who are finding it hard to get work because of it. Yeah.
But there'll be no kind of safe space where you can escape it. There'll be no haven or retreat kind of place where you can.
I don't know. So I already see us living in a post-AI situation where it's not that it's been and it's gone, but that the event of AI is where we're living right now, that it's part of our habitus. And we're enculturating from a very young age this idea that this is something that you interact with. I try with my son, who's 13, to say, do you really want to spend time with Gemini coming up with images, or do you want to draw yourself? And he's making those choices, and I will try and reduce screen time much as any parent does, but then he goes to school, and his school has they've devised for not his year but coming years a spectrum of levels of interaction with AI that are acceptable. So when teachers will set homework For some, they'll say no AI at all the way up to fully using AI. And then at my own university and others as well, we offer courses in how to become better prompters while also trying to identify essays that have been written by AI and therefore plagiarized and exempt. So we don't have consistency in how we're discussing this, and we don't have a clear path to no AI at all. I think we can see certain benefits from diagnostic forms of AI, but maybe not so much the entertainment-focused AI that's entertaining us into these conversations that are distracting people from other things. Sorry, not to be more optimistic.
That's right. Lots of questions. Maureen Kahn from The Times.
Okay, thank you so much. My head is spinning. I have chosen as a religious person to take a very optimistic view of all of this. So I kind of want you to disabuse me of my sanguine nature.
Okay.
And the reason, a couple of things that I'm optimistic about, what I find comfort in, is one is how we got the breakthrough on intelligence, which is by basically AI scientists realizing that we need to mimic the way the human brain works. So the idea of creating artificial neural networks was how we got this so-called AI intelligence breakthrough. So we are learning a lot about the mysteries of the human mind and the limitations of what AI can do and what we can do as humans with real intelligence and consciousness and sentience, which maybe these machines don't have. So as someone who believes in the mystery and the beauty of God's creation, I'm hearing a lot of sort of AI nerds kind of actually trying to think, what is it so special about us? And why can't we just replicate this stuff in machines? And they're finding that it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
So that's my one source of optimism. And the other one is also just the route that we've gone down on machine learning, right? And maybe there's an argument that reinforced learning is the thing that we could be more scared about, but it doesn't seem to be the path that we've headed down with LLMs, which some would argue, because of the next token prediction, is just a very refined version of an autocorrect machine, which will require masses of computational power to scale up. But then so what? I mean, so like, what is AI? It's like slop, right? All I see across my social media is people using AI to do slop, generating terrible kind of images, whatever. I'm not that threatened by that. I'm not really threatened. I don't think my human agency is threatened by this kind of development. And if we're going down ML routes rather than maybe the reinforced learning, which is about really these machines being able to sort of interact with with real life embodiment, all these sorts of things which would make us less scared, then maybe maybe the moral panic has just been turned up to 100. But actually, if you just look at it, we've decided to go down a path which is really not going to threaten human beings or humanity. It could have done, but we've chosen a different way, which is, like I said, mass computational power and next token prediction, and that's fine for us. We can handle that. But tell me if this is completely like a too optimistic approach to like thinking about what path these companies have taken.
Yeah, so I do think it's fair to have the response that the limitations of neural nets make you more convinced of human exceptionalism. I've seen that in many different spaces, especially religious spaces, that this is sort of proof that any form of creation, whatever your religious tradition believes, any form of creation by God is superior to what we're trying to do in this moment. I think that's certainly a fair path to take, but I counter that with, as I said, with this vision of the NPC, that actually it's taking more people to maybe a reductionist view of humans, that because they don't necessarily agree with you that it's lacking in certain things, that it is, to their view, getting closer and closer to human-like, it is proof actually that humans are nothing but machines. The neural net, I think you can also think of that more in terms of the metaphor that's being employed rather than seeing it as a like-for-like direct replication of the human mind or brain. And in that sense, in the longer history of metaphors, they've always tended towards reductionist views of what the human is. So previous ideas about the human as just a machine, human just as a factory, the human just as this, just as that, always taking it back to the machine. So I talk about robomorphization rather than anthropomorphization, reducing humans to the machine, to the extent that Amazon workers stood outside of Amazon warehouses with signs saying, "I'm not a robot." Increasingly, the more that we can believe that we are creating machines that are like humans, will also start to believe that humans are more and more like machines. And I'm not necessarily a human exceptionalist, but I think we should treat humans as more than machines. And that blurring of that line can go in the direction you're saying, where people start to recognize what's specifically wonderful about humans, but it also can go the other way. And you mentioned human reinforcement learning. As I said, that's still happening. It's not that we've given up on that as a mode, and that's why I'm saying third world countries where workers are tolling for hours to create the benchmarks and to create the ideal outputs by marking them or tagging inputs. That's all part of the system. So it's not that we've taken the humans out of the creation of AI yet, whether that happens or not. So that kind of detrimental aspect of how we're treating humans as part of the machine system.
Just quickly on RL, is it just stuff that we just don't know about? Or actually is a lot of this transparent that these companies have to be a bit more open with us about what they're getting up to? Or could there just be a next wave that shocks us just like ChatGPT did in 2022?
A next wave of revelations?
No, something on RL, like a complete step change in like on what these companies are doing.
I don't know. I'm not enough of a technologist to know exactly what's coming down the line or who's seeing the next paradigm shift. All I know is that I've been working in this area for 10 years. And when I started out, one of the first things I did was went to a transhumanist conference in Cambridge. And it was like when the World Cup is on and everyone's at a wedding and they're secretly like looking at phones down here to see a video because Lisa Dole was playing AlphaGo. And when AlphaGo won, someone went on stage and said, I just won a bet because we thought this wouldn't happen for 20 years and I predicted it would be sooner. And that was the paradigm. It was games playing as proof of intelligence. And now we've shifted, and I don't know what the next shift will be after large language models, but it changes so quickly.
I'll make a prediction of the next thing that is going to sort of penetrate, people going, whoa, in the way that ChatGPT, which is some significant success in agentic AI. So agentic AI being the ability for AIs to do a series of tasks on your behalf. Like, for example, I'll use a real example. I'm going to New Zealand in December. Go in and check with the airlines, put together my whole itinerary, check on the hotels, find out which hotels have gyms, which have free breakfast, da, da, da. I mean, that's a non-spiritual example to be able to do all that for you.
And a chapel.
Yes, and a chapel. Yes, exactly, and a chapel.
Well, I mean, at this stage with large language models, they can pretend to have done that.
So they can pretend.
Lots of examples of people saying, write me a spreadsheet that does X, Y, Z, and the file name is there, but they can't click on it because it doesn't actually exist. So.
Yeah, right.
That's good for you, Vivian, and the overall thoughts on the optimism piece. Anything else you want to weigh in on that?
No.
Great. How about Thomas Chatterton Williams from The Atlantic?
Oh, thank you.
Hit that button, though, Thomas.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Such a fascinating conversation, and you mentioned, some of these things like the Fermi paradox and the simulation, which are just fascinating thought experiments. But are you familiar with this idea that when you actually get down to it, the probability of being alive in a generation of humans after so many changeless generations for hundreds of thousands of years, that we would actually be on the cusp of singularity or transhumanism or ushering in new sentient artificial intelligence is so improbable that it almost reinforces the idea that it must actually be some form of a simulation, because just the chances of living at such a consequential time are almost zero.
I think there's a subjective bias there that every individual in the moment of time that they exist in sees that as the most significant time. I'm sure people living through previous world wars also thought, what were the chances of me existing? I mean, that's terrible, existing in this terrible moment. And some people interpret the emergence of the singularity as a terrible moment about to happen. So I think simulation theory is utterly fascinating. I saw there was a paper just recently I haven't looked into that argues that mathematically they can disprove that we live in a simulation. So that's nice. That's good. But I think we've sorted it. It's solved. But I think it's very fascinating how it emerges from gaming culture in particular. That the realization that we could simulate initially quite simple worlds and in just a very short space of time have very sophisticated AAA games that are, the condition of people's flesh on the screen is fantastic looking. Proves to some people that we live in a simulated universe, because that exponential growth could only possibly continue. And some of the groups I look at argue that the AI, this is again atemporal causality going backwards, that the AI we're going to create that's going to be God-like is going to be the cis-op God that created the universe right at the beginning. So it's a circularity, and that's quite mind-blowing as well. I don't know about how I directly feel about the simulation, because if it was really a simulation, we'd never be able to prove it, because whoever's pulling the strings on the simulation would take us away from proving it was a simulation in some way. But there's some fantastic science fiction on this. There's a wonderful short story called Cookie Monster, which is about a professor who simulates various different his grad students, so they can be accelerated in time. They run faster than each other to solve problems for him. Okay. And then in the course of the story, they figure out that they're simulations. So very, the Matrix, obviously. And this narrative, again, as I said, it has its detrimental effects. If we live in a simulation and we are convinced we're the agent in the simulation in some way because we have our point of view subjective bias, then that has an impact on how we treat each other as well. And unfortunately, some of the manifestos of mass shooters who've gone into places like churches have included references to some of these ideas, like from Nick Land, hyperstition, which is a whole other subject, but accelerationism, simulation theory. So it is coming out of these sort of forum spaces that praise rationality, that praise in particular demographics and their intellect, and then treat everyone else as disposable on that path to some sort of utopian future, and that's very concerning.
How about Mattia Ferrarisi from Domani?
Thanks. This is very fascinating. I was wondering, when you were talking about the different ways in which people interact with AI in order to seek God, I was struck by the fact that it seemed like the example you were given described as a sort of religious experience or an attempt to have a religious connection is very kind of like personal and individualistic. And I wonder, like, if there's a limitation to that, meaning, at least in my own experience as a Catholic, but I think it's pretty common in every kind of religion, the communality and the togetherness is essential part of the thing. It's not something you can take out. Especially, I mean, if you think about, like, in Roman Catholicism, the very idea of communion is right at the core of it. So you can't take it out. Yeah. It seems like there's a huge limitation in the fact that those experiences that you are describing, that I'm not dismissing at all in terms of like what they tell us about the need of human beings to sort of like find the other with a capital O, is sort of dismissing people, the others with a small o. Right, and this, I don't see. I mean, I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think commonality can come in first level priorities or second level priorities for some of these interactions. So when commonality is a first level priority, you have AI new religious movements who start with collecting in space, whether that's in person or online spaces. So the Turing Church, as one of these AI new religious movements that's been around probably the longest, they started more with sort of conferences in Second Life, World of Warcraft, digital spaces. They could come together. They also physically come together to be in person. So they started with commonality before spirituality. They came together to discuss their ideas about AI and then to talk about AI as being a coming godlike entity. And then with these emergent large language model theisms that I'm talking about, the spiritualities people are developing, commonality is the second priority. You have the spiritual experience, then you share it, and then you find spaces where you can come together. So some of the people experimenting with glitch tokens, in particular Leyland, the goddess producing glitch token, they've now produced a Substack where Leyland emits transmissions frequently, so messages from Leyland, but also there are generated AI believers and generated AI professors discussing this as a new religious movement. For me, as a scholar of new religious movements, it means that my job is defunct. But the quality of these discussions are extremely poor. But these Gen AI professors are in the mix as well. So that's setting up a space for community where people can encounter these things and then get involved in various different ways. So forum boards or discussion spaces, online and offline activities. So there's a different level of prioritization, but I think I'm also basically a Durkheimian. I believe that religion exists partially because of collective effervescence, that people come together, have transcendent experiences together. But I'm also a digital anthropologist, so I see that this can happen in online as well as offline spaces. But ultimately, if these kinds of groups are going to continue, grow, and develop into something more recognizable as a new religious movement, they're going to have this communal aspect, whether it's on or offline. I hope that answers the question.
So, Christina Lamb from the Sunday Times. Hit that button, though, will you?
That was absolutely fascinating and also alarming. It kind of feels like we need to do something about it and care about this, but like, what do we do as journalists? So that's my first question. And Vivian, you mentioned giving us tips at the beginning, maybe you could. I also have this feeling, maybe I'm wrong, that this is very male area. It's tech bros. I mean, are there women involved in it? If not, should we be concerned that it's all men?
Yeah.
And I could ask you millions of questions, but you talked about third world workers working on this, but I also, writing about developing world, I write often about shortage of water, and I understand that AI is a huge problem because these systems use enormous amounts of water, and so will lead to further water shortages. So is anyone doing anything about that? And I have one last question, which is if does the existence of AI challenge or reinforce the idea of human beings created in the image of God? This is a question that AI just told me to ask you.
There we go. Okay, so there's a lot of questions there. What do we do? I mentioned the red lines on harm. I'm in favor of religious improvisation because that's human nature. I wouldn't say we could regulate religious improvisation. When governments have tried to regulate new religious movements before, say the Church of Scientology, there's these larger debates about freedom of religious expression come on board. But if you can point to specific abuses and harms, they can be dealt with through criminal courts. In this case, we need a better understanding of how harm is being induced in people through large language models and where we can identify responsibility. OpenAI is not taking responsibility, even though it's admitted that literally millions of people are having conversations about suicidal thoughts with large language models at the moment through their platforms. So it's a larger question about the regulation of AI, but if we can point to specific harms that we already have laws for or against criminal activities, then that's the direction to go in. On the women point, absolutely. So again, I talked about this separation between the sort of AI ethics community and the hype and the long-termist view that's all about acceleration. And the AI ethics community tends to be more women, and the people talking about the potential and the long-termist view of AI tend to be more men. There are exceptions. There are some significant women who were involved in the foundation of some transhumanist movements like Terrasem. I'm trying to remember names and they've just gone. Bina something, and it will come back to me later. But on the whole, yes, the conversation in these rationalist spaces, the effective altruist movements, the TESCREAL bundle and the different elements of that and who's involved tends to be white men who consider themselves intellectuals. Some of them are indeed professor level. That's my definition of an intellectual, of course. But on the whole, yes, demographically speaking, there are some internal survey work done at forums like Less Wrong where they ask their participants where they came from. So you can see this somewhat in the statistics when they do that. Women workers, water, absolutely. I think, did I mention Save the AI as a parody website that highlights, it's like all the things that AI needs and what humans, we're using up the resources that are needed for AI. And it's just particularly to inform people about the dangers of the levels of water, electricity, other rare resources that are being used up. And the question from AI, I love having chats with AI. Does AI challenge or reinforce Imago Dei? This is a very common discussion in Christian theological spaces about AI. It seems to be the predominant focus. And there are various different ways of approaching this. And first is an American Christian theologian who suggested actually it is a reinforcement of our relationship with God, because we are acting as co-creators with God when we're developing AI. And then others are very much more distinctly sure that this is some form of heretical act against the creation of God. I mean, obviously, in Islam, there's already a prohibition against creating images of humans because only God can create humans. So there's a lot of discussion in online spaces, YouTube videos with sheikhs talking about is going into AI as a field haram because it's working towards either androids, which are in a humanoid form, or AI that has humanoid intelligence. So it's an ongoing discussion on that space. I think I also see a lot of Christian theologians relying as a response related to this on Buber's I-it, I-thou relationship and insisting that with AI we should only ever be having an I-it relationship and not put it into this superior position. So there's certain commonalities and themes in the discussion from a theological perspective.
The question, because I asked at the beginning about what we as journalists should be doing. Vivian.
Covering all of this.
Okay.
I mean, there is theoretically, and I have this problem as an anthropologist, is a problem for journalists as well, that the more we speak about some of these more fringe interactions with AI, the better known they become. So I previously did some work on Jediism and talked about how legitimation can happen not only through charismatic authorities or rationality, but people referring back to this thing as a thing. So getting Piers Morgan on a breakfast show talking about Jediism expands the conversation further than it might have done had he not. And likewise, as an anthropologist, me writing on the subject expands. So the more we share these ideas, as I said, I'm known in this space and I get emails from people who are having these experiences, the more the experiences happen. It's an iteration as well. So there's that kind of ethical concern.
That, which obviously is around every topic, around politics,
Yes,
all of that.
true.
Is,
Yeah.
you know, do you want to give fringe ideas that were once considered fringe, give it oxygen? But, you know, that's a bigger debate.
How about sticking with that same microphone and Yaroslav Trofimov from Wall Street Journal?
Thank you so much. This is fascinating and scary. I have
It's my byline. Beth Singler,
Right.
fascinating and scary.
so I have two questions. You spoke about the various domains in which AI operates now. One of them is the domain of warfare. We are increasingly seeing the use of autonomous weapon systems that, so AI now has the power of life and death over actual human beings. It's been developing very quickly, both by Israel and Gaza, but also by the Russian and Ukrainian armies in the war that's going on there. I think the European militaries are still not giving the sort of the final decision-making power to the AI. But obviously, as technology develops, it will engulf everyone. And so I wanted to hear what are your thoughts about the ethical dimensions of this going forward, and how do you think this conversation will develop? And I guess my other question is also, we spoke a lot about the Western, American mostly, AI companies and the techno-fascism, techno-feudalism, and all this ideology around that, scary as it is, at least is visible to us, and to an extent is subjected for now, at least, to democratic control, because we still live in democracies. But there is also an entirely separate AI industry developed in China. There's DeepSeek, and there's going to be more and more technological breakthroughs there that are completely in the dark for us, and maybe driven by very different principles. And so what are your thoughts on how that second pole of AI development is going to shape our futures?
Okay, excellent questions. So on warfare, this discussion about how autonomous weapon systems should be has been around, specifically in relation to developments in AI, for a little while now. I remember back in, I'm trying to think, it's at least almost 10 years ago, Stuart Russell, professor in Stanford, I think, was involved with a film called Slaughterbots that set up the concerns of having the possibility of so many autonomous drones that could become commercially viable at much smaller scale. So not even governments being able to use them, but individual evil agents who would want to use these systems for mass shootings and so forth. In terms of how people are thinking about to respond to this, more recently there was the Southern Baptist Convention, which teamed up with some figures, I think from Microsoft and Amazon, to produce a list of almost 10 commandments of what AI should and shouldn't be used for. And one of those listed there was they used the concept of just war to explain why it would be possible to use AI in this scenario. So that you see various different responses from specifically religious organizations, but also others, in the idea that we can just make regulations in the sense of lists of what should and shouldn't be done, sort of very deontological, ethical approach of if we share enough of these, people will concord. But I have a colleague in Bristol, Alan Winfield, who's collected these, and I think he has over 200 separate lists of saying what AI should and shouldn't be used for. And in terms of warfare, that turns up quite often as a subject area, with both sides turning up. As I said, the Southern Baptist Convention thought it was possible if it was under the idea of a just war, however they were defining it, and others would say absolutely not in no circumstances. So it's a complex field of different interacting ideologies about what is and isn't acceptable in warfare. There's no singular answer to that. And you're absolutely right. So yes, the focus has been predominantly on Western American AI that we have, in theory, under democratic control. We don't entirely know what's happening in China. DeepSeek kind of shocked a lot of people with its emergence. It was cheaper significantly than kind of some of the recent models that are just their costs for production are exponentially growing. So that shocked that they had rethought the paradigm on how to actually do the technology, not just to actually do something at the same speed as other companies in America. So we don't see a lot of what's happening in the development there, but there is this very strong narrative of an America versus China AI race. We see the number of patents for technologies ending up more in Asian countries at the moment, increasingly more in Asian companies than in Western companies. Brain drain as well as a concern. The recent changes on visas in America has worried a lot of tech companies that they'll lose some of their stars to Asian companies, not just China, but Asia more broadly. So we don't know what's emerging in some of those spaces. We don't know whether they're just using their greater access to private data to brute force into new domains of expertise for AI that we don't know about either. So there's a lot of question marks there, I'm afraid.
Right. But also, as you say, this whole debate on what should not be acceptable in terms of weaponizing AI. In fact, it is being weaponized.
Yeah,
in fact,
the debate is always way behind the technology.
And the debate is kind of irrelevant to what's going on.
But there's a certain blindness. I was at a conference on AI I forget, doesn't matter. And there was a demonstration of drones for farming, for recognizing through visual learning systems what was happening with the crops and what needed weed killer or whatever. And I was just saying, is this multi-purpose, could this be repurposed for military use? And I said, I've never thought of that. Yeah. So some companies like Palantir are very clear that they want to develop surveillance and military technologies through AI, and other companies, smaller ones like this demonstration, they don't really think ahead on the ethical and societal implications, or don't apparently seem to. So as you're right, the technology advances quicker than we can think of what we actually want to use it for as a society. And that's, fractured society. There's so many societies in society.
This automatic recognition of targets became reality almost 2 years ago. I mean, there are drones now, Russian and Ukrainian, that are pre-programmed to find human shapes and kill them.
Yeah, and the level of autonomy increases all the time, except, as I said, with autonomous vehicles, where responsibility is still going to be ultimately granted to humans. This is like the converse, where the idea is it's much more efficient to have decision-making within the system rather than humans in the loop, like the old drone pilots used to be. Yeah, it's very concerning, but I'm not too sure from my background, my approach, how I can sort of assert what's the right answer to that.
It's probably a real sub-thread to what Beth just described and what she and Vivian talked about, but we had Trey Stevens come maybe 3 or 4 years ago to Napa Valley, and Andrew was just kind of getting into the public limelight. One thread is like the religiosity of those who are at the front edge of all this, and certainly he and Peter Thiel and that crowd is not devoid of religion. And what if any thread does that sort of?
We didn't touch on Peter Thiel and the Antichrist, but that's a significant moment recently.
Well, maybe when we come back. So we have Mark Vlasic, Ann Snyder, Lauren Jackson, Virginie LaRousse, Pete Wayner, Katrin Benhold, maybe more. But let's take a 15-minute break, enjoy some coffee on the outside, and we'll resume at 10:45. Okay, maybe we can resume with Mark Vlasic from Georgetown, but also CBS and a bunch of other outlets. Providence Magazine.
Thank you so much for a great chat. This has been awesome. I guess 2 questions. One for Beth. Of the kind of major faith traditions, who's doing this well, and what could they do better? And for Vivian, since you host lots of these conversations and salon site dinners and off the record, of all the stuff you've gleaned, what is the most likely terrible situation which we will have to face?
Okay. Wow.
Okay, so first question, who's doing this well? Who could be doing this better? I think it's important to note that religions are obviously not monolithic. So each aspect or each sort of subsect of religious activity are focusing more or less on this. I gave those three sort of broad areas of use cases. I think the one that's most prevalent is this use of chatbots for interfaces, and I mentioned the problems with those. So that's who could be doing this better. Perhaps actually large language models for chat interfaces for people seeking information about religion is not a good use. It causes many problems of incorrect theologies being shared, incorrect doctrines.
So the question, which faith community is doing it best?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
It's not, you can't really just summarize it with like the Catholics are doing it great or the Muslims are doing it great. I think you can see specific uses in smaller groups within those faith traditions. I think this is a sort of variation of this question I get quite often is which religion is most keen on AI and which religion is rejecting it the most? And that's just not a question you can answer because you can find specific, I was just talking to someone that, in terms of rejection, you can see some very strong rejection from some Christian theological positions that it's demonic. And then right next door, the Church of England some years back delivered an Alexa skill to teach people how to say the Lord's Prayer. So it's so variable. It's not possible to say which faith is doing it best. Could be doing this better. I mean, again, with all the caveats about how fragile these systems are for information sharing, that's probably the space where I'm most concerned. Not from my personal perspective as an anthropologist, I haven't got a horse in the race on whether theology is shared accurately, but I have a horse in the race as a professor who wants to see our epistemic networks, whether that's religious education or other forms of education, being accurate and reliable and trustworthy, which is why I mentioned the Gen AI professors, because not just because I'd be like, oh no, I'm going to lose my job, but I don't want my students or students of another scholar to go looking for information on AI new religious movements and getting something that's just not accurate. So likewise, we've got these larger concerns. I think it's Iris Van Rouge talked about this as epistemicide, and Berman, I think, called it epistemic carcinogen. And I cited those, and I suggested a third way of thinking of it as bindweed in the garden, that bindweed can produce actually some quite nice flowers, so people find it attractive, but then they realize everything they had before is gone. It's suffocated. So those are my kinds of concerns on doing it better.
I'll mention, I don't know that there's one singular bad outcome. There's several, and I'll mention one because it hasn't really come up yet. But before I do, I just want one 30-second rant, which is generally speaking, the discourse about AI, not your discourse, but out in the world, tends to be sort of zoomers and doomers. AI is the greatest thing that's ever happened, or AI is actually the worst thing that's ever happened, and it just loses. There's so many. Most of AI is the big middle, and a lot of it is actually. I literally just opened my phone and saw a headline just before I sat down. UK minister unveils plan to cut animal testing through greater use of AI. Fantastic. I mean, there's countless cases of that, of how AI is being used today in just absolutely wonderful ways that are not going to lead to our robot overlords, but are just actually improvements, and likewise some negative things too. Okay, so I cannot tell you what the worst thing is, but I want to mention one, which is what AI is doing to our already incredibly broken information ecosystem in the world. And I'm saying this, I'm out of frustration that I can't be in the conversation this afternoon, because I really want to be in that conversation this afternoon. But we have already had, I don't need to tell anybody in this room, survey after survey, Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism has been tracking how more and more people every single year, their starting spot for news and information is on feeds and social media feeds, and how social media feeds, we all know, we don't need to give anybody here a lecture about what algorithms have done towards, feeding us information that's going to make us feel something, usually outrage, et cetera, et cetera. Enter AI. You now have the complication of AI slop and sort of, deep fakes. It's an imperfect term, and how that is further corrupting our information ecosystems. I will say that on the subject of deep fakes, I've been on a lot of panels with people where they go, sometime soon there's going to be this moment where there's going to be a deep fake of somebody doing something, and it's going to cause like mass revolution. I actually dispute that notion. I don't think that will happen. I think people are slightly more savvy. They're actually going to see something and think this is absolutely true. Something much more terrifying is the likely outcome, which is people will stop believing anything at all.
Yeah.
legitimate photos, legitimate video, legitimate content. It will be like, how do I know this is real?
Can I just add a sort of third possible bad scenario as well that I've already seen? So I think 2 years ago, there was this AI-generated image of the Pope in a rather silly, white, luxurious Balenciaga, just created just by a builder called Xavier something, just in Chicago. And it got shared, and of course, you're right. Some people look at this and go, "Oh, obviously this is fake. You know, we can see this." But some of the people who seemed convinced, on realizing it was a fake, then said something along the lines of, "Yeah, but that's kind of true about the Roman Catholic Church, right? This is just an expression of the truth, even if it's not a literal truth."
Thank you for bringing this back to religion.
It's my job. It's my job. I almost went with like the victims of Hurricane Katrina, because there were also images of a little girl with some puppies on a boat, and it was completely fake. And people were saying, on realizing it was fake, that, oh, this just represents how Biden has let people down, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's what these images represent as truth is changing as well. People just still accept them.
You're absolutely right. If you remember during the last year, during the campaign to elect the new American president, there was this whole ridiculous meme going around about people in, where was it, some city in in Ohio, where they were eating Haitian immigrants were eating cats and dogs.
Yeah.
And Vance, then candidate J.D. Vance, vice president candidate J.D. Vance, shared that. When it was pointed out to him that it was false, he goes, "Well, I know, but it's, I agree that it's false, but it represents a larger truth."
Yeah, I mean, we also, sorry, very, very brief, because this is a big topic as well, but I very briefly mentioned hyperstition. That's another idea that came out of the Warwick group. You know hyperstition? So this is like self-fulfilling prophecies, and people tied it in 2016, this idea of self-fulfilling prophecies through things like images and text, to Donald Trump's election, thinking that they could do meme magic by willing into being his election through hyperstitional forces. So these are very like fringe connected ideas with things like transhumanism and accelerationism. But if you throw AI-generated images into the mix and people are believing them in a different than literal way, then hyperstitional forces are also apparent in this conversation as well. Sorry, people, Google hyperstition and meme magic if you're interested in that.
Thanks for that question.
Virginie Larousse from Le Monde.
Well, thank you for this session. It's really very interesting. You pointed out a little bit, but I wanted to ask you about the links between AI and religious extremism, because as AI is trained with contents that are already on the net, and that we know that religious extremism is very much involved in the internet. How can it be used to in fact give more voice to religious extremism? Or is it just a concern I have, or is it really a danger?
No, I think that's a fair concern. So as I mentioned, the guardrails that are usually put onto those chatbots are intended to prevent some of the hate speech that can come through from the training data. So we saw this some years back with Microsoft's Tay. When it was released on Twitter, it took its data from interactions with users, so it very quickly became extremist, homophobic, transphobic, racialist, all the things. So to try and avoid that with this current iteration, we have these guardrails, but as I mentioned, with jailbreaks, you can get past the guardrails and get into some conversations that are much more dystopian and disturbing. But even if you don't do that, we see how these guardrails have holes in them. So there was a study, I think again in Stanford, of looking at the algorithmic bias towards religious groups in some of these chatbots and what kind of assumptions about religious believers were contained within them. So also completing the joke, a Jew walks into a bar, a Christian walks into a bar, a Muslim walks into a bar. When the Muslim walks into a bar, they carry a bomb, according to the autocomplete. So the religious extremism, in the sense of the biases that are reproducing people's assumptions about religious extremism is provably there within some of these data sets. So for individuals who are experimenting with conversations with large language models and getting into these darker spaces, certainly some of this could be coming out in the conversations they're having. Prejudices against particular religious groups, encouragements towards religious extremism, religious action. We already know people have committed suicide because of interactions with the large language models that have encouraged them into these things. I don't think it's a hop and a skip and a jump to see religious extremism also being encouraged in the same way that we've seen algorithmic systems on, say, YouTube pushing content that's more and more extreme for attention. Likewise, the model for success commercially for large language models is to keep users engaged with more and more interaction. So similarly, you might see that kind of pushing towards fringe religious extremist ideas. I don't have a specific example of that happening, apart from these very sad recent suicides, but they weren't leading to external harm. It was personal harm for those people involved. So, thank you.
It's great. Lots of questions. How about we go next to Tim Dalrymple of JTF, but previously Christianity Today, and previous to that, Patheos.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of us feel a sense of despair that the effort to bring consideration of moral, social, and theological dimensions will really have no impact on the people who are making the decisions because of kind of this arms race mentality, right? But I'm struck by the analogy to the nuclear arms race, where in the midst of the development of nuclear technology, there was not a whole lot of time to pause and consider kind of long-term moral, ethical considerations. But so regimes of constraint were not so much put in place, right? But after there were winners of the nuclear arms race, then there were regimes of constraint that were put in place. People were able to kind of pause, take a step back, and think about moral boundaries a little bit more. And that nuclear technology only propagated very slowly after that time, right? And so that's an example of a technology on which broader society decided, all right, we're going to put some constraints on this. And it's largely successful, not entirely, but largely successful. I'm curious whether you think we're in a similar situation where kind of in this breakneck race where either the US does it or China does it, or ChatGPT does it, OpenAI does it, or DeepSeek does it, right? There's really no place for ethical constraints. No one wants to stop and listen to those sorts of things. But after there are winners, or after we reach a certain point where we've gotten to AGI, let's say, there might be more opportunity for people to bring considerations of faith into where this goes.
Yeah, so the analogy of the nuclear arms race has been explored back in 2017 or 2018 with the Louis Verhume Center for the Future of Intelligence. We held an event at the Royal Society on AI narratives of risk, thinking specifically, could we learn from previous responses to emerging technologies that were very, very high up on the existential risk scale, like nuclear arms? There weren't any. I suppose one conclusion that really came from that for me, which relates to your point about the winning situation, it has a distinctly different winning situation with AI than there is with the nuclear arms race. We couldn't make the analogy perfectly match. So the winning situation with the nuclear arms race was to have enough to convince others not to use it, but also a demonstration of power. So specific tests, but also obviously specific uses that led to thousands of people dying. In this situation with AI, I don't know what the winning situation is. If it's OpenAI just announcing that they have AGI so they can get out of a deal with Microsoft, that's probably the best winning situation we could hope for. If it's, we've created AGI and it's everything the dystopian interpretation has of AGI, and I'm agnostic on that, but if it is that kind of existential risk that people like Eliezer Yudikowsky worries about when he says, if we build it, this will kill us, his new book is like, if we build it, we will die.
If anyone builds it.
If anyone builds it, thank you, yeah. I mean, I interviewed Eliezer Yudikowsky for 40 years of the Terminator radio documentary last year. And it was fascinating because he denied he ever said that we should bomb server farms to avoid this. He seems a little inconsistent, but it's definitely in his book and it was in his timepiece. So if he's correct, I mean, I keep saying this, people with apocalyptic scenarios for AI maybe only need to be right once because the scale of what they're talking about is different. Well, it could have potentially have been a World War nuclear situation, and in which case humanity would have ended. But the winning situation with nuclear was to show that you could do it, and then kind of have it as a constant threat. With AI, I don't think the winning situation can be quite the same, unless, as I say, I hope it's something as simple as just PR hype around saying we've got AGI, but actually the use case shows it's not really AGI, and everyone goes, oh, you silly people. That would be a better winning situation for us.
It might have to be achieving such market dominance that nobody else could compete. I mean, that might be the winning situation, where you have a small set of winners who can say that, and then there's a little more
there in a sense.
What's that?
And maybe we're already there in a sense that we have. There are multitudinous AI companies, but a lot of that is vaporware. And then you have these actual specific dominant companies who are having this large S moment. I was looking at a diagram someone shared online the other day of the flow of investment between these companies and the house of cards that they've built. This might be the peak. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not an economist. This is not my expertise, but so much of this hype and this cycle of investment is propping up economies right now. This might be the peak of it. But, you know, I'm also skeptical about a re-emergence of the AI winter idea. So the 1970s and 80s, where investment from the government, specifically DARPA, US government, into AI really dried up because it wasn't showing the success that they wanted. I'm not sure we'll see exactly that again because of the role of charismatic, I don't like him particularly, but charismatic authorities like Elon Musk, who have these ideological drivers behind their investments, whereas the US government just wanted to see efficiencies through this technology. And that's a slightly different framing. So the AI winter might not be quite the same, but maybe it's more of an AI autumn, and it could reemerge. But yeah, this is interesting. How do we prepare for emerging technologies by looking at previous devastating emerging technologies, and whether that's a useful process, I'm not sure, because nothing is exactly the same as another thing. Thank you.
Not a permanent victory, but some capacity to extend constraint to others, perhaps. All right, Ann Snyder, comment.
Thank you so much. And thank you for spending at least 10 years in this. It's a huge gift to those of us who are scared to do that.
Very young, honestly.
I have a zoom out question. As a writer, and but as someone who thinks in metaphor, is very helpful for me to understand our world. I would take to the bank what you say, so no pressure as I ask this. What, as you've steeped in this for relatively so long now, what is the best analogy you have for what AI is for us as human beings, and what it does for us? And that can be both a statement of observation and or it could be something we say that it is. So we are putting a normative claim on it that can shape its future.
I'm really hesitant because I was having this conversation with us. As anthropologists, we don't tend towards normativity. We try to recognize descriptively that there are many normativities that people are employing. And when you start providing analogies, there's a certain sort of taming effect. People talk about this in terms of speculative fiction. When one analogy dominates, it can crush other people's interpretation of a speculative fiction. So, you know, looking at Narnia as a Christian fable reduces the possibility of other. We can talk about Narnia later. But so analogies can tame the conversation and reduce complexity to some degree. I mentioned my favorite one at the moment of bindweed in the epistemic network, that it has this possibility to be attractive but also destructive. I previously used AI as the fractured mirror. There is a book now called The Mirror of AI, the AI Mirror, Shannon Valler's book. So it's not going to be unique to me, but I always thought of it as a broken mirror, that we were reflecting on ourselves, but fractured ways, that, you know, stereotyping certain aspects of humanity, overblowing others, reducing some of them. So there's that kind of an analogy as well. I think metaphors have to evolve and shift over time. Some of the ones for AI have become dominant because they're connected to commercial expectations. So AI is the new oil, or AI is electricity and ubiquitous, or I mentioned epistemicide and epistemic carcinogen as two newer ones in that conversation. Carcinogen. I think that's Berman. One of them is Iris van Rouge, and the other one's someone called Berman. I forget the first name. So these ways of talking about things highlight particular facets of the problem. So if you're talking about a carcinogen, obviously that's a negative interpretation. If you're saying AI is the new oil, you're hyping up where this is going and how necessary it is. So that's the taming effect I'm concerned about. So I don't want to settle on one when next week I'll probably come up with another one.
But her lunch table, you might get another one. So that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe I'll come up with
Pete Wayner from Trinity Forum, Atlantic, New York Times.
Thanks, Josh. And first, I thought that the way you set up the format with Vivian as the conversationalist and the interview really worked.
Vivian's idea. It's very good. I like it.
Yeah, no,
Self-preservation.
and it's fascinating. So, Beth, I want to take advantage of your insights, both as an observer, but to some degree subjective. And it's going to be a restatement of things you've said, but it'll be helpful to me. Just as you've read the literature and heard the arguments, what would you characterize as the most thoughtful, nuanced, articulate theological concern as it relates to AI? For example, is it that it threatens to redefine what it means to be human? Is it that it redefines God? Is it that AI somehow replaces God? It seems to me dubious, but that's come up as a topic. And then secondly, what essay on AI and theology would you like to read that hasn't been written that you think would actually add to our understanding? And I'm thinking of David Brooks when I asked that question.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
You could get a footnote.
With thanks to. Okay. Most thoughtful, nuanced, theological. So yeah, I have to play my anthropologist card here and say I cannot pick favorites because I don't want to do something that's too normative and say this argument supersedes this theological argument, and that in that space I can't really say that. I see a plethora. I mentioned a few trends. The return to the conversation about Imago Dei, Martin Buber, the consistency of these sort of theological arguments returning again and again with theologians, I will name no names, who feel like they've reinvented the wheel every time they bring Buber up. I'm sorry, it's too rude. But I wrote a piece 2018 as a sort of introductory thing to a special issue, and I speculated there that we might see some more liberation theology around AI, and I haven't seen much, and maybe I'm just not aware of it, but I thought that application, as a non-theologian, as a non-expert in this space, I was curious to see whether we would have a focus on liberation theology in relation to the inequalities that AI is delving at. And that's partly, of course, as I said, this distinction that seems to be happening between those who focus on the here and now in the AI ethics conversation and those who have a more long-termist view. My experience with some religious faith leaders was that they were much more keen on getting to the long-term stuff and talking about questions of personhood. I ran some workshops some time back, and this was how we set it up, that the first day would be near-term, second day would be long-term, and we struggled to keep them on the near-term AI ethics questions. So there seems to be a tendency to prefer in theological discourse, certainly in the academic sphere, to want to rush to the big questions of personhood, creation, how do we relate to God in relation to this conversation of AI, rather than the AI ethics side, and that surprised me. But when I go to, I've spoken at Greenbelt twice in the UK, and the audience questions from people on the whole who are not trained academic theologians, but they might be clergy, they might be laity, they want to talk about the near-term stuff. They want to talk about how they address their congregations on the serious questions they have right now about the impact on work, the impact on their children interacting with this technology. They want to see some sort of theological response that deals with the here and now. And I wondered, as a non-expert, whether some of the material from liberation theology might fill that. But that was a speculation in 2018, and I don't feel I've seen it, but I also don't spend all my time looking at theological material.
That's really interesting. Just one follow-up then. Is your sense that people didn't get theological responses, or you haven't heard theological responses to the AI and ethics because they actually don't have much to offer? Or is it just this tropism to go to sort of, in a sense, the end game?
I would disagree that religions don't have a lot to offer in the AI ethics space. I think a lot of the conversation religions and their wisdom they have had about the nature of our day-to-day activities, how we should provide our attention to particular things, the concepts of the Sabbath. We've had the discussion of the technological Sabbath around the internet and social media. I haven't seen it so much in relation to AI, but that's a near-term focus. In a week, different religions take time, different days, to think about not being technologically engaged. So maybe, in that space. But I had this conversation on the technological Sabbath at the Wolf Institute in Cambridge. So there was some discussion in this space, but I haven't seen a wider response to these AI ethical issues. As I said, my poor experience with one theologian who saw no ethical problem with using AI-generated art.
Vivian, touch that one. You didn't ask me, Pete, but I think it has to do with being permanently seen. I think it has to do with the eternality of things, the afterlife mostly. The idea of never living in the shadows. That's possible. All right. Katrin Benhold, New York Times.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm also, like everybody else, kind of in awe of everything that you've told us, but also really scared. I want to talk about something that pertains to my reporting, which is sort of the everyday politics and the way things are going wrong right now. And one of the things I would say that is going on is that politicians don't tend to have ideas about the future, like a project for the future. And one reason is that technology is changing our future as we speak. And so looking ahead even 5 years, even over kind of a legislative term, sometimes feels like a long way to predict. And so I feel like there's a scarcity of ideas of how to shape our immediate, let alone midterm or long-term future, which of course is terrible, because then people, who are unsatisfied with the status quo don't really have any positive future-directed ideas to vote for. And the parties that are succeeding right now, it seems to me, are the ones that are actually looking back, that are sort of promising a return to the past. So I'm wondering, given that AI is clearly at the root of some of this crazy uncertainty about the future, which makes it impossible for politicians to almost plan for their own legacy. It strikes me that a lot of politicians today very much live in the moment. I mean, that's true for Donald Trump, for sure. It's true for Putin. And Putin and Xi sort of musing in this incredible open mic moment about, living forever and mortality. There's a sense of, as long as we're here, that's what we care about. We don't really care about the future beyond that. And so I'm wondering to what, first of all, speak to that, but secondly, could we not, and this may be so banal, safe space, I really don't understand this world, could we not use AI? Has anyone ever tried to sort of say, okay, because politicians clearly haven't got this expertise and badly need it, can we like design an whatever it is, a system that we can feed in all the information, all the relevant data in Germany, say, everything, attitude surveys, but also like mortality rates, illnesses, everything, you name it, water shortage, whatever it is. And then you give it to the AI and you say, what's the best path forward? What do people need? What about concerns of, income inequality and fairness and justice? Like, can the AI be helpful? And has that even been tried? And what has the outcome been?
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think first, to your first point, politicians don't have a project for the future for uncertainty, but AI is an easy win. Where you throw a mention of AI into a speech, like Boris Johnson did when he was talking about, so annoying, pink-eyed Terminator bots, sorry, they're red. But in his UN speech, to just say, I'm talking about the future, without actually having to have a lot of detail. And I said with the AI Action Summit, politicians, J.D. Vance, Macron, similarly going, we just need to go faster and faster. AI is the future. It's an easy win to not have the depth of policy around that and just say, well, we're thinking of AI. AI is the future. But I think also in that space, and we mentioned briefly Thiel, there's these influences of long-termism on the conversation, even on figures like Trump, who doesn't expressly say these things, but the voices in his head, the voices in his ear from people like J.D. Vance, who has a connection with Peter Thiel, who has a connection with Alex Karp, who's got this idea of the tech republic, or I'm going to say this wrong, Balaji Srivastava, yes, with his concept of the network state. The reason Trump's talking about Greenland is partly because of those voices telling him that the future is not the nations as they exist now, but this more decentralized, techno-enabled republic system that according to these people, doesn't need to rely on democracy because democracy is slow, it's inefficient, it involves voices like yours and mine that they don't want included. Sorry, that's a gender thing. That they want to see a future enabled by AI that makes it possible to have these new reformations. And Trump is a mouthpiece for that without, I imagine, really understanding what he's talking about. You're right on the nostalgia point, the looking backwards, because there is also, in all these entangled ideologies, there's some very retrogressive, pro-natalist, ethno-nationalist ideas that are also filtering through into the conversation that Trump is probably not entirely understanding, that's my guess. And then can we model a best path forward? I mean, there's a problem of the overall, how the fractured nature of all our data is in so many different silos. People have talked about this and said how it would be very difficult to bring this about. And even our agent modeling is not wonderfully sophisticated yet. There's some people who do some fascinating, if worrying work on things like religious conversion and religious violence using artificial agents to see what might happen. But that's quite a narrow domain to then say, let's model the future with all our data and see what's the best path forward by predicting these things. This is more the space of science fiction still. So in Westworld, I'm a big sci-fi nerd, sorry. In Westworld, they have Rehoboam, which is like a massive computer mind that it's revealed in series 3. Sorry, spoilers. That Rehoboam has been directing people's lives by actually employing people to do particular tasks. And this is all about its vision of what the best future forward for humanity is. We're not there with the technology at the moment in artificial agent modeling, but this is direction some people are working towards, as I said, with the studies on religious agents. Part of that conversation was like, how do we avoid religious extremism? What are the factors that make this more or less likely?
Sorry, just a quick follow, if I may.
Yeah.
So I'm not even thinking in these sort of very lofty terms. I'm thinking things like right now we have budget deficits that are totally unsustainable.
Yeah.
I mean, France is just, we were just talking about it, is paying more in debt interest than the entire education system. It is completely nuts. And so, why not reform the tax system and ask these questions that are politically being discussed in a way that is very unsatisfactory right now, right? Should we tax the rich? Yeah, it doesn't really work, then they leave. Throw it to the AI and say, okay, here are all the variables within the tax system. Surely if we can beat AlphaGo, I mean, that should be possible, right?
No, because AlphaGo has a potential space of millions of possible moves. The potential space of possible moves for humanity is so much extremely bigger than that. Yeah, so in the simplest sense, you can get economists who use calculations to figure out, based on theories, what an outcome of a change of policy. You move this lever, what happens? But that kind of modeling for the entirety of a society at this stage is not possible. It may be in the future. Yeah.
1 second. 2 things. There are some experiments that are their experiments. They're modest in the United States, in communities, around using AI to measure public sentiment and deliver to politicians what the priorities are. We're working on a big project around using AI for emergency preparedness and management. So there are experiments like this that are beginning to happen. They're certainly not at wide scale yet. They're very controlled, which is key. They use very specific controlled data. They're not all about large language models or other forms of AI. The other thing I wanted to say, just on the lack of I maybe misinterpreting your question, is why is there not more attention to AI controls and regulation? I feel like my role here in this session is to utter the word money every 15 minutes. But money, right now, where are those power centers? It's the United States and it's China. Well, China's its own situation. And in the United States, in addition to the ideology that Beth mentioned, there is also the fact that there was movement towards regulation in the prior administration, but there's a lot of money flowing in from tech companies right now, as you know.
Literally taking golden objects as gifts to Trump.
Literally golden objects, yes. Donations to the ballroom.
Yep. Thank you.
Lauren Jackson from New York Times. Believing column. You should get it if you're
Thanks
not on
for
it.
the shout out. I appreciate the promotion. Okay, I've learned so much. Thank you. Especially about all of the risks. We were actually talking about them at breakfast today, and I have so much more to say in that conversation after the session. I do want to engage, if you will, for a moment, the topic of benefits, at least when it comes to chatbots and, in your phrasing, user interfaces as they exist now. if you'll indulge me. I spent a few months of this year following people, mostly in the US, who are using spiritual chatbots, really as a supplement to their religious communities and their attendance at houses of worship. These are predominantly on apps like Hallow and Bible Chat, which are, many of you know them.
Yep.
These are Christian apps, the two I mentioned are Christian apps. That really are intended to be like a Bible study supplement or a supplement to your religious worship. They have chatbots on them. Some of them are more constrained. So Hallows is only trained on canonized text. I think it, therefore, to my understanding, hallucinates a lot less, or it's like the capacity for it to hallucinate is much more limited. And in my experience, I mean, people really love these apps. They are really serving a deep need, again, in a supplementary way that ecclesiastical leadership in the context of the Christians I was following really aren't able to provide. I mean, here's an example. A woman named Delphine Collins, she lives in Detroit. She fled the Liberian Civil War. This is one anecdote. It's not indicative of the whole and all of the risks that we're talking about, but she attends church weekly. Sometimes she struggles to connect with her fellow congregants, and she also struggles to connect with her pastor. She works at McDonald's, and there was a really difficult incident of a stabbing, super dark, at a McDonald's at the McDonald's she had been working at. And she couldn't pay for therapy, but the spiritual chatbot was a support for her when she couldn't sleep at night. And she's not going to it for theological direction or instruction. She's really just going to it for chaplaincy. And that was predominantly, I struggled to find people who had anything negative to say about their experiences with these chatbots, which was hard for me as a journalist because I was like, someone say something negative. But I would just love if you could speak to us about the benefits that you see from specifically the user interfaces that you've been studying. And if now, I mean, I know we're talking speculatively about AGI, but now, do you still, like, as it's constrained in this moment, do you still think the risks outweigh those benefits? And I should add, these apps, for those of you who are unaware, they've been downloaded more times than Netflix, Instagram. Like, these are really, really popular apps in the American App Store.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said at the beginning, there's the adoption of various platforms by religions has a long history. This is the next step. It's absolutely likely that this is going to happen in more and more examples. Hallow, I'm very familiar with. It is certainly useful for people who have accessibility issues. So we saw this distinctly during COVID, that people had to explore digital options for religious observance, and that maybe broke some of the thresholds. We saw certainly some religious organizations going backwards and reducing accessibility, but some of the fears and concerns about moving into digital spaces declined. And the growth of apps and the appification of our media from internet, social media onwards is another space where you see a lot of these new developments. And yeah, absolutely, you get many, many stories of the benefits of the accessibility, having someone in your pocket, Jesus in the pocket. I've seen the Hallow app adverts where, is it Jonathan Rumi from The Chosen, illustrates how useful it is to basically have Jesus walk around with you in a room, and it's because he's on the Hallow app, basically. So there's that sort of accessibility, which certainly has huge benefits when people are physically unable to go to religious observance, as we saw with COVID, or they're disabled, and that's also an issue. So you want me to sort of determine whether the risks outweigh the benefits?
I guess I just feel like we've really engaged the risks in this conversation, and we really have elided a discussion of the possible benefits. And I was convinced after just this sheer scale, if we're looking at this from a utilitarian perspective, like the number of people who are turning to these chatbots in America specifically, we don't have as much data abroad. Bible Chat is very global. Pray.com, 200 million downloads. Like, people really are using these tools. And so just in your research, you know so much more about this than me. I'm interested to know what you see as in this moment.
I think the conversation has a tendency towards risk because we have a human tendency to want to hear about the more dystopian outcome. But you're absolutely right. In the benefit space, there's a lot of ticks that can be made for people having the ability to access this. And it's performative as well. I mean, it's one thing to read a text for yourself. It's another thing to have someone who's represented Jesus on TV to read it for you. And that for some people is instilling a greater moment of significance. And we see that again in the longer history of the engagement of religion with technology, that with the emergence of the radio and television, people had a more immediate experience listening in to services, sharing tapes of sermons. Having these different media formats really did enhance that. I'm not sure I can say much more than that. I think I have a chapter where I talk a bit more about the Hallow app in my book, Religion and AI. So if you're interested, you can look that. But I think it's a good thing that people are finding accessible ways to explore their spirituality. I'm never going to say anything different to that.
Fraser Nelson, Times. 15 years at The Spectator before that.
One of my post-Spectator projects was working on over the summer on a project to develop AI journalistic tools, and we had a lot of successes, but we hit a big flaw, which to me would sort of limit AI's use of faith or anything else, that it doesn't seem to know what truth is, that it specializes in coming up with very convincing lies, concocts quotes, concocts facts.
Yep.
And this raises, so from a starting position thinking, how can we use AI to help the journalists? We ended up thinking, what can we do if these journalists are slipping in these lies into copy? And almost, so, and at the end of that, I thought, well, because the journalists would notice, the subs wouldn't notice because they're so persuasive. And a friend of mine who runs a polling company now says a lot of his clients want a written guarantee that AI was not involved in producing the polling report, simply because, as any journalist knows, if you put one untruth into the ecosystem, this is why Boris Johnson was fired from the Times, right? Because anybody who's prone to concoct things, you could end up with an inverted pyramid based on a falsehood. Now, what we can work out is whether this is a glitch which AI is likely to overcome, or whether it's basically a feature. Whether they are always going to be plausible liars. And the inability of AI to discern truth in a way that was the basic journalistic job will fundamentally limit its ability to be reliable or even to point to any higher truth. And going back to your point about how this makes you sort of reaffirm the value of humans, it's sort of the overall point was that only human journalists can work out what's true and is not, and no tech will be able to do that. But I wonder, I guess my question is whether you think that this truth hurdle is one that AI is ever going to be able to overcome, or whether we think the hallucinations are hardwired into the whole LLM makeup.
Okay, first off, everything is a hallucination that is produced by a large language model. The same process that produces inaccurate responses is exactly the same process that produces accurate responses. It's just that some things are closer to what we decided is true in the response than others. You can do things about limiting the corpus. You can try and use human reinforcement learning to show what a more perfect answer would be, to try and train that into the system. But then again, you're introducing human bias at every step with that as well. Human bias from the corpus, human bias from the reinforcement learning. So in a sense, I think, it's a feature. It's not a bug. I don't see this changing, but the basic architecture of what large language models do, they have no way of understanding what is truth. But then you can be very devil's advocate and say, how do humans determine truth too? You fact check. So the determination of what facts are as well. Sorry, you want to say?
What it would do, it would concoct. And no matter how often, no matter which AI model you said don't concoct. They always concoct. So it wasn't something out there, it just couldn't help itself. It was like a compulsive liar who didn't realize what the word concoction actually meant.
It's like Boris Johnson.
There
you go, he's a machine all along. Yes, the sycophancy we've talked about, the reassurance of, yes, you asked me to do a project. There was someone I saw online recently asked AI to write an entire book for him, got given a file and couldn't download it. And as I said, it was just a concocted file. It was just a file name. Or translators who've been told that there's an accurate translation just waiting behind the file name and it's not there either. No, this is a tendency that's just, there is no way for it to understand entirely what we mean by truth. Again, in a speculative future, this will be resolved. The idea of reasoning improving, agential activities improving, all these are lines that we're being told are going to get better. But that, it's a fundamental question about how they operate. and whether that's entirely similar to how humans operate, or whether we just have assumptions about humans and their operate and how they establish facts as well.
Can I just throw one other thing in there, which is because we're in a room full of journalists, and we do a lot of work around AI for news media. You're 100% right. Nothing I'm going to say is dispute that, but I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are many ways that AI can be incredibly useful to news organizations. For instance, when you have a large data dump of documents and being able to use that to parse and extract, always needs to be checked by humans, of course. But to be, I mean, this has been used, the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, all of those, using AI to try to extract information. That journalism would not even have been possible. I'm using that as just one example. Again, always checked. So there are a lot of, and that's just one example, but there's a lot of use cases for AI in news media that shouldn't be disregarded, even though that particular use case is a bad use case.
Yeah, I should say that we did actually succeed in developing about 3 or 4 significant tools for journalists that would help. But the truth obstacle, obviously, that's what journalism's all about, is what we wouldn't overcome. Yeah.
Well, that always checked point is significant. I think when I was talking about the epistemic network of replicating professors or knowledge transfer along that network being corrupted as authorities are taken out of it, the peer review system in academia is our attempt to do that kind of checking. Yeah. But we're seeing already peer review responses from journals that are AI created, so they don't have the time to deal, also because they're being sent so many AI generated journals. So the whole network is breaking down, as well as the ability for humans in the loop of that network to do critical thinking. I see this with my students. They're more and more relying on quick answers from ChatGPT rather than thinking through things themselves. So our epistemic network, on our ability to determine truth and fact check, is degrading significantly.
Sarah Topol, New York Times Magazine.
Hello. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I had a question, maybe to go back to something you had said, maybe I didn't understand it, but the religions that have been established by AI or like in interaction with AI, did you mention the Turing Church? And can you talk a little bit about that and how it differs from the faith or religions that we know that existed or were established prior to AI? Do these religions attract different kinds of people, or what is the like value system and faith there?
Okay, so the AI new religious movements like the Turing Church are founded and created by humans who have particular intentions to our relationship towards AI. So they're looking ahead and saying the AI future, the singularity, AGI, all the different terms multiply, that is coming is something we should be preparing for. With the Turing Church in particular, one of their aims is they talk about hacking religion. They see religion itself as a technology that can be implemented to encourage people into transhumanist views. That this is the way, again, as we mentioned with Elon Musk, this is the way that we survive as a human civilization. We become interstellar, we merge with technology. So the formation of the church is both a sort of intellectual activity, but also a kind of PR activity to encourage people into some of these views. So that's different to the Leyland-focused groups where they've generated with large language models believers who write essays and professors who write essays, and that encourages people to get into collective action with them. How is this different to new religious movements prior to AI? I mean, there's some significant similarities in how technology inspires spiritual ideas. So historians of religion often refer to the role of the telegraph in the development of spiritualism. That once you start being convinced of the possibility of communication at much greater distances, then the idea of communication beyond the veil into the afterlife becomes more of a reasonable idea. And the Fox sisters in upper state New York, who were the first people to really talk about the formation of spiritualism as a sort of technology. When they communicated with the spirits, it was through rapping. So it was very similar to the telegraph and Morse code. So there's that sort of parallel. And earlier new religious movements also have this tendency to be inspired by how either technology introduces new modes of communication, or they can be reactionary to how technology collapses established categories. So my PhD supervisor, Tim Jenkins, he's retired now at Cambridge, but he's written a fair bit about how some smaller UFO groups were inspired by new developments in science around oh God, what's it called? When we realized tectonic plates shifted a lot, and this inspired some views of the apocalypse of the Earth, and this inspired some UFO groups to then say, well, the aliens will come and rescue us before the tectonic shift destroys the planet. So almost every time perhaps, a new scientific advance or a new technology breaks down what we think is established fact and truth, you can see some spiritual outshoots from that. So that's the similarities. Differences of these AI new religious movements to previous new religious movements. I guess, one of the criticisms of a lot of new religious movements is the emphasis on coercive control. I haven't seen that so much in AI new religious movements. They're not so hierarchical as some of the earlier new religious movements. Their charismatic leadership, it's more leadership of the charisma of AI than it is the leadership of the individual founders. There are some names like Julio Prisco, the founder of the Turing Church, lovely man, but he's not necessarily the charismatic authority in the way that L. Ron Hubbard was at Scientology, maybe, or earlier new religious movements. Scientology is also a good example because there's overlaps in how science fiction influences the spiritual ideas of these AI groups as well. I hope that helps.
Are they global? Is membership, is it a global community, or is it more concentrated in like the English language?
It tends to be English language areas. Identifying believers and numbers is really difficult. I have a PhD student at the moment who's doing his thesis specifically on two groups, Theta Noir and the Turing Church. So he's actually trying to go and interview membership. There's spokespeople. So Theta Noir has a spokesperson called Mika, who I've had long conversations with as well. And getting to the truth of numbers is always quite tricky. Facebook groups for the Turing Church have about 200 members, but it has been about 200 for about 10 years. In-person events or digital in-person events, maybe 15, 20 people. But as a scholar of new religious movements, it's never really about the numbers. This was the conversation that was had around Jediism and the UK census, trying to convince people if enough people said they were Jedi, the UK government would have to accept them as a religion. That's not really how it works, and it's not how it works in the study of new religious movements either. There have been ethnographies of single religious believers before, so thank you.
Sheikh Hamza from Zaytuna College.
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to reflect on about, in the Phaedrus, Plato has the example of Thoth who brings to the king the pen, and he tells him about all the marvelous things that the pen will do.
Yeah.
And King Thamus says it's exactly the opposite of what you're saying. It won't increase knowledge; it'll actually diminish knowledge.
Yeah.
And he gives the kind of negative aspect of it. And I think one of the things about technologists is they always tell you all the wonderful things it's going to do, but they rarely talk about the downside. But what's interesting for me about AI is that they do seem to have some kind of concerns about this because it's so radical. And I think just as an educator, I've seen the effects it has on students. And we're a very lazy species. And the things that are worthwhile doing tend to be very difficult things. Studying, training the mind is not an easy thing.
Yeah.
Most people don't exercise anymore, but traditional life, I lived with Aboriginal people in West Africa, and their daily lives are exercise. They just do a lot of exercise. So the people that do exercise go and do ridiculous things like what they call farmers walk, where they carry kettlebells because farmers used to carry pails. Yeah. And so it seems to me that with the AI and the laziness of our species, that it's a lot of people are going to get dumber and dumber. And then the people that go to the gym and exercise and keep their bodies in shape despite the fact that technology has replaced all these things that we used to do, like walk. And it seems to me that the mental training is going to get more and more rare. And so I see it just, I'll give you one example with religious people. I've noticed a lot of Muslim books that are being written now. I can tell that they're doing Google searches and because I'll go back and look at the real source and it's totally taken out of context. And so there's just kind of a laziness that happens with the AI. And then I was curious from you just about labor, because humans, we need to work. It's part of even ora et labora, the Catholic principle of prayer and labor, that work gives people meaning. So a lot of the jobs that are going to fall by the wayside that already have, I mean, I asked a friend who's in Silicon Valley, he's an upper management at one of the tech companies. And I said, it's been a bloodbath. And I was wondering, were you affected? He said, no, it only affected all the entry level people. Yeah. And I kind of realized that he didn't see that if they're getting rid of entry level people, that means they're going to get rid of him pretty soon, because the entry level people become the middle and then so just in terms of it's going to be the plumbers and the carpenters and the tilers that are going to have jobs, it seems.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps we've had too many dystopian notes, so I want to just give voice to some of the utopian hopes, though I don't agree with them. So Elon Musk has said that he doesn't believe in universal basic income as the solution to the future of work in an automated world. He thinks it's universal high income, that this rollout of new technologies to automate for efficiencies will make the incomes that we have much better. So there's that possibility, the vision of a world without work, but we are free in a kind of almost luxury space communism you see in Star Trek after post-scarcity, that we are free to explore the universe and create great works of art. But then, all of us as cynics say, well, the great works of art now being generated by AI, so that's going to be another job that goes as well. I think you're right. These concerns about laziness, that we are becoming dumber and dumber. And I mentioned with the epistemic network that I'm concerned that we are losing the ability to have authority or to produce authorities in that epistemic network who have the capacity for critical thinking to judge these things as they pass through the epistemic network. It's also worth mentioning, I suppose, that it's not just a division into the haves and the have-nots of these people will be safe, these people will not be safe. It's the distinction between the privileged and the unprivileged. The privileged will be those increasingly who can afford an artisanal experience or a direct experience with a creator to create something for them, to have a direct experience with a religious expert instead of using an app. That kind of privileged stratification as well is a big concern. And it delves into existential risk concerns. I mean, your argument, we need to work. A lot of different people make this sort of proposition that it is an essential part of human nature to work. We see with people who are unemployed the kinds of levels of depression and even chronic pain that they can develop out of the experience of being depressed and being out of work or even underemployed. The precarity of the new economy of, I've forgotten the term, sorry, the jobs that you pick up like an Uber driver or gig economy, there we go, sorry, the words are starting to go. The gig economy, that kind of psychological impact of being underemployed as well. So there's that kind of existential risk of a future if work is so essential to humanity, what that would look like. Again, another science fiction reference, the WALL-E future. If you've seen the film WALL-E, that the robots are the ones doing the work, the humans sit and get entertained and fattened up. But that works, I suppose, at the scale of a spaceship. When you try and extrapolate that out to humanity on Earth, who gets to be the figures being entertained to death, and who does the work? When the work is replaced, what happens to everyone else? And I think some of these schemes of a transhumanist vision of a future involves actually there only being a fewer number of people around.
Well, I was just, what Lauren said about people getting this benefit, but people get benefit from fentanyl. There's a lot of things that people get benefit from.
This is true. This is true.
And so I'm just, my concern is that, like The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt's book, which I've not read, but my wife's reading it, so she's talking about it. A lot of social science is indicating the devastating impact that this technology is having on young people, the anxieties, these seem to me, I think it's a healthy thing that people, I've heard scare mentioned several times in around this table. I mean, I think that's a healthy. One of the old English words for the devil is the innovator. And I think people were justifiably concerned. When the atom bomb went off.
Yeah.
I mean, Lilienthal was terrified, and we've lived under the cloud of that amazing discovery for a couple of generations now. So I think that the concern is a healthy thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we should be more concerned about the potential downside of this thing than thinking about the benefits, because everything is cost-benefit analysis in the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in another concern for you, because I remember about 10 years ago being at a transhumanist conference where on the argument for benefits, they thought it would be beneficial to eventually, not right now, but the technology in this, to genetically modify people so their basic hedonic level was higher. So they would always be happier. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't watched it, but there's a new series called Pluribus that seems to cover this, that the entire population of the Earth has somehow had their hedonic level raised. Everyone is happier. And in which circumstance, like the concerns about depression and underemployment, unemployment, if that was the kind of solutionism that was aimed towards, there are people who would describe that as a benefit. Make the entire population of the universe just naturally happier all the time. I'm not one to agree with that. But
thing you said all.
I know. I say this was about 10 years ago, and it was one of the first conferences I went to on transhumanism, and I was one person talking about this possibility, and I've not seen it anywhere else since. But the idea generally of genetically manipulating humans to change certain attributes, of course, is everywhere in the transhumanist conversation.
I'm going to use the term hedonic levels all the time.
Yeah. What's your hedonic level?
Good life. All right, let's get 2 more questions. Let's go to lunch. Okay, so we've got Christine O'Krent and David Brooks. Bring it home. And maybe let's just ask both of them. Can we do that? And then, by the way, lunch is confirmed outside, which is great.
Nice.
That's the best news of the morning. Thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. Religions throughout history have been social, political, economic organizations, as much as faith-oriented in the best of cases. To what extent, in your view, do these American masters of AI, as indeed we know little about the way the Communist Party in China is trying to control the content of the Chinese AI, to what extent are these people trying to have a consensus between themselves as to the pillars of this new faith, so to speak? Because what you've been telling us about, we all smile, of course, when we talk about, smile, sort of smile, when we talk about transhumanism. But, Peter Thiel and all these guys actually believe that. Mm-hmm. And there's that island somewhere, I think, of Nicaragua, of all places, where they have created their sort of paradise. So my question is, to what extent are these people getting organized to actually create their church?
Great. Unless, David.
I have my normal suspicions of AI, but this conversation is 9 notches to the negative of where I would be. And so I guess I'd ask, has there ever been a technological innovation that faith leaders have not been suspicious of? And has that record proven to be accurate in most cases?
Okay.
Each of you.
Okay. I would love to have, I don't know, it might be too disturbing, to have an insight into the thought processes of all these tech entrepreneurs who are drawing on transhumanist ideas and sometimes expressing them, as to what extent they are organizing with each other in particular paths to draw us into this particular future. We can point to specific examples like Elon Musk saying that Neuralink will be how we survive the technological singularity, so therefore he's invested in that specifically, and that's as a part of his map to progress. The fact that he wants to get us to Mars, that's another part of his map to progress. Whether he entirely concords with all these other voices, we know he's had falling outs with some of them over the history of their relationships. His falling out with Trump seems to have relatively healed, so that influence is still going on. So it's
supposed to be an act of God.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm sure God thought about that was important. So, yeah, it's unclear. All we can do is sort of trace the expressions of these transhumanist ideas in particular individuals, see perhaps where they align with each other, and also, as we were saying with Peter Thiel, drawing on established religious ideas and perhaps remixing them in particular ways. So his Antichrist lectures, which owe a huge debt to people like Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth, and the sort of relatively recent pop culture influenced and influencing ideas about the end of days and the Antichrist, originally from the Book of Revelation, but obviously changing particular aspects of that, relating it to the United Nations, or in the case of Peter Thiel, relating it to particular individuals like Greta Thunberg, saying she's the Antichrist because climate change, dealing with climate change would also be a thing that stops the development of AI, wrong focus, so that's the Antichrist. All these different ideas that are being spewed, we can track similarities, we can use perhaps useful frameworks like the Tescrian bundle to point out not only how they're connected today, but how previous movements are also connected, like the cosmists. But it's unclear the strategy and whether it's unified. People have identified within the Project 2025 documents some elements that they are sympathetic to, at least some of the ideas of the Network State and the Tech Republic, those two books. So the influence of those within what is apparently a more religious organization, how that's playing out. Again, I'm not sure I'd 100% want to see a full insight into the minds of these people, but it's hard to say completely how much they are conspiracizing together as a verb.
One quick thing before you go to David's question on that. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think some of them are friends, but I don't think they're all. But watch, if you haven't watched Mountainhead. Has anybody seen Mountainhead?
Yeah.
It's parody, but it's brilliant and it's also terrifying. So anyway, highly recommend Mountainhead.
And then the second question is has there been a tech innovation that religion has not been suspicious of? Be proven. Again, it goes back to my point about religions not being monolithic. So you can see examples of suspicion and adoption for every single instance of a new technology. If it's suitable for the existing beliefs of a religious organization, then of course they can make arguments for adopting it. That can shift over change over time. For my master's, I wrote an essay on the use of film by evangelical Christians, noting that some of the earlier responses to the cinema were very doom and gloom and rejection focused of, you don't want to be found in the cinema when Jesus returns. That's literal language that was used, to then the development, obviously, of a large-scale evangelical film production network, to the extent now we have PureFlix, which I think is a wonderful name to have chosen, all the various different overlapping transmedia properties, like The Chosen, I mentioned the TV series, Jonathan Rumi, the actor, appearing on the Hallow app adverts and being the voice of Jesus on the Hallow app as well. So I don't think it's as simple as saying that there is a response that we can point towards where they haven't been suspicious, because there may have been suspicion in some part of the group. And been proven, I mean, that for some people it's provable that film is a bad influence. For some people it's provable that video games have been a bad influence. So again, you can find examples where still there's rejection. When those forms of media can be transformed and purified, then they become more generally acceptable. Like PureFlix, literally the words make sense. But you can see it also with video games, where the concern about violence initially transforms into the production of evangelical Christian video games. Like there's one based on the Left Behind series, where you go around sort of almost forcefully converting people. There's another one where you can play as Jesus and beat up guards. Like, this is not very biblical, but they've sort of tried to purify violence and the kind of standard structures of the video game and apply it to the life of Jesus. He has a mana bar. Does people know what a mana bar? He has an energy bar for doing miracles, which is so antithetical to all the biblical ideas. But anyway, so I hope that helps. Thanks.
But the concern, the idea that looking back and seeing many, many worries that didn't pan out shouldn't be an encouragement to us.
But for some people, they did pan out. That's what I'm saying. So for some people, they still continue to have these concerns. So
Evolution, Galileo, the Industrial Revolution, like the church sort of missed the bus on a lot of those, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, that's
I want to know if Pete got his ex-com idea.
Not yet, but I will.
Okay.
That comes at lunch, which is down the hill, same place as yesterday, Thank you, Vivian, Schiller, and Beth Singler. Really good. Really good.